Good morning, members. Welcome to the January meeting of Economy and Resources Committee. Apologies for the light show at the beginning. I thought it might be beneficial if we were able to see each other. We have a number of important reports to consider this morning, and we'll deal with the business in our usual efficient manner. So item 1 is SEDERUNT and apologies. Claire, can you provide the SEDERUNT and any apologies, please?
Thank you, Chair. We've got 19 members present this morning. 2 apologies from Councillor Fairbairn and Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Claire. We'll move on to declarations of interest. Do any members have a declaration of interest they wish to make? Sean?
Yeah, item 11, the CHAPELCROSS transformational update. I work for the site licence company Magnox, but I will be staying in for the agenda item.
Thanks, Sean. David? Okay, thank you. Any other declarations of interest? Okay, we'll move on then to item 3, the minute of the previous meeting of 19th November. Claire, there is a factual issue, I believe, at item 10. If you could just clarify that for us, please.
Yes, there's been a clerical error identified at 10.1 and 10.11 of the minute, where reference to the Chair and Vice Chair of this committee should read Leader and Chair of Economy and Resources Committee. Providing this advice on behalf of the Monitoring Officer, we're asking you to note the error and obviously presenting it in this way for openness and transparency.
Okay, Leader.
Thanks. I think there's also, for some reason, I am down as having left the meeting during item 13 and returned in item 15. I didn't actually leave the meeting at all. There was no reason for me to leave the meeting, so I may have been moving around, or maybe I was just invisible or hidden behind somebody, but I was actually present during the meeting. I see Councillor Wood actually also managed to leave the meeting twice without coming back in between times, which is a fair amount of...
Okay, so if we can just deal with those factual matters as well. Councillor Martin?
Just on 2.9, it says, I thought he knew the owner. I didn't know the owner, it's my partner's brother.
Okay, members, with those factual corrections, are we content to note the minute of 19th November? Thank you very much, members. We'll move to item 4, Strategic Housing Investment Plan, report by Head of Economy and Development. This report updates members on the developments within DGHP and the Wheatley Group, and also seeks members' agreement to include projects in the Strategic Housing Investment Plan that will deliver refurbishments of existing buildings to meet demand. We are also provided with an update on the outturn of the 2018-19 plan delivery, which shows that almost 15.6 million was invested by the Scottish Government in Dumfries and Galloway to support the delivery of new affordable housing. This is a significant increase from 2017-18, when 9.9 million was provided to the region. These figures are further supported by our development partners' own financial resources, meaning that the actual amounts levered into the region will be in excess of those published in the report. Jamie Little is here to assist if members have any questions. Jamie, have you anything to add to the report?
Thanks, Chairman. Nothing to add.
Thank you, Jamie. I'll open that to members' questions and comments then. Dougie?
Thanks, Chair. Jamie, in paragraph 3.1.1, you make reference to the SHIP making a significant impact on the Council's priorities. Can you make any comment in relation to our commitment to the climate emergency and how our new priority on climate change will impact on the SHIP in future?
Yeah, thanks. The approach we've taken to a lot of the SHIP projects is to look to minimise any negative carbon impacts, climate change impacts that new construction brings. Adopting an approach to utilising derelict land, empty buildings, minimises the level of impact of construction. The resident social landlords who receive funding through the Affordable Housing Supply Programme are also required to provide high energy efficiency properties as well. And there is additional funding to go over and above normal energy efficiency measures. So they do look to provide renewables and recycle, retain heat within the properties. all which not just alleviate fuel poverty, but also minimise the carbon impact that housing has on the climate.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other member? Henry?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Jamie, on page 38, could you just clarify the difference in the two numbers, why the significant gap between the resource plan and assumption of 19.279 against the spend of 15.599?
Thanks, Chief. The difference between those two figures, the 15.599 million is the amount actually spent within the region during that time. The 19.279 million relates to the total amount that was available to the region to spend. The delivery of the 15.599 highlights a significant increase from previous years and the enabling role that the Council has been able to take to achieve that significant increase in development funding.
Henry, if you want to come back, by all means.
Yeah, so that doesn't explain the gap of about 4 million. Is that 4 million then still available, or is that lost? Or was that just an assumption in the sky, a pie in the sky figure or whatever? That's where I'm coming from. Okay.
Thanks. The 4 million difference there is unfortunately lost to the region. If it's not invested, it's then allocated to other regions if they're able to utilise the funding. The resource planning assumption is based on an annual figure, and it's in simple terms, if it's not spent within this region, it is unfortunately lost to the region. The role we're trying to take is to maximise the available funding that can be spent within Dumfries and Galloway. There is still some work to be done. There are good relationships built. We are in a particular situation of being a stock transfer authority, and out with the city regions, we have delivered the highest investment in affordable housing of all stock transfer authorities.
Thank you, Jamie. That's helpful. David, you were next.
Yes, thank you. It's very interesting reading the report, and there seem to be a number of good initiatives. May I ask if they are all current initiatives? I've got a remark about the MMR, the mid-market rent. If schemes like the Town Centre Living Fund were applicable when it was for mid-market rent, that might make them much more attractive. Then I have a question about the new supply shared equity. I heard a sort of mortgage broker telling me that the Help to Buy scheme is a bit of a time bomb, and people don't necessarily realise what they're getting into. Is this a much different situation where people fully realise what they're getting into, and can the government equity stay there for perpetuity, and therefore there's no, you're not facing a disaster in 30 years' time or something? The sort of Highland region always seems to come out better in funding. Is that because of some romantic attachment that we have to it? Do they lobby better, or do they just get more SIMD points? Why are we less well treated usually in national schemes? Is there anything for are there any programs for self-builders? And then these are all pretty much national schemes. However, we might have a slight advantage if we were the best at communicating them locally. So the types of groups that might want to hear about these schemes would be young people who are just sort of thinking, oh, okay, this is a place where I could stay and make my career, make my home. And if they realised that the region was working with them to make it possible for them to afford a home, that would be part of the jigsaw, not the only piece of the puzzle though. Potential relocators might hit our website somehow and find that, oh, well, we've presented these options for them in a very easy form, and we look like a welcoming, easy to work with council. Perhaps we could do that. And can we have a succinct version of what's available and where to find more support that would go to perhaps small developers and community groups? So quite a few questions there, and I look forward to your brief answer. Thank you.
Jamie, I think there are a number of questions there. Can you assist?
I'll try my best, Chair. Yes, in terms of attracting young people, to either stay within the region or to move within the region. It's obviously a key focus of the Affordable Housing Supply Programme. One of the highlights for Dumfries and Galloway has been the delivery of the Partnership Support for Regeneration scheme. You may notice in the HARDTHORN report that Dumfries and Galloway has been particularly successful in utilising that funding. That targets people who are either on waiting lists, first-time buyers, people who have a connection with the region who may be looking to either move back here following their studies. These are the people that are targeted. There is, when properties become available, there is an active advertising campaign that is carried out by the developers, assisted by the registered social landlords. The adverts have been put on the Lowburn Housing Association website and also the Common Housing Register website. In terms of the lift scheme you're referring to there, for first-time buyers, again, that's aimed at young people, enabling them to get on the housing ladder. The offer of grant assistance that is provided by the Scottish Government is only recovered when that property is then sold, and it is on a percentage basis of the property. It's not something that would cause an overburden as the equity increased in the property. In terms of the Highlands that you mentioned there as well, the Highlands and Islands have a very active community housing trust in place and are very effective at delivering a lot of community housing projects. You're probably familiar with quite a few of them. That's a role that in Dumfries and Galloway has been taken forward by the Dumfries and Galloway Small Communities Housing Trust, and they are in the process of significantly increasing the number of projects they're delivering. This is obviously going back to 2018-19, but we're actively involved with the Small Communities Housing Trust over quite a number of developments, and it is likely that the funding that is utilised by them is likely to increase. So there are a number of positives to come, and a lot of future work that's coming over the horizon as well. I hope that's covered most of your points.
Yeah, only to
David, you want to come
restate.
back?
Sorry. Yeah, just
you want
to
to come back?
restate the last tranche. I think there's a lot of good news in here, but we need to communicate it more widely and more specifically to those groups I mentioned, and I think that could stimulate a lot more activity, because I'm not sure. It was a bit of an eye-opener for me. I didn't realise a lot of this existed. Okay.
Okay, thank you for that. Ian?
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back to, excuse me, Councillor McClellan's point, that was well made. So just looking at the page 38, as where Henry was alluding to, and I noticed at Aberdeen City, so their resource assumption was 17 million, it ended up near 30 million, so they benefited obviously from a high level of spending going back to ours. But so the thought that's come through my mind is, okay, in order to try and optimise the maximum spend in regards to our resource assumptions, is there any particular blockages that might be affecting? So is it Scottish water, is it land contamination? Is there different, I would imagine it could be a whole raft of different things that could be slowing the process up, because we see there's a number of projects on the ship. I just wondered, could you give us a bit of explanation behind that, so at least we reach a kind. So if there's anything I think Dumfries and Galloway can do, Council can do to try and smooth the way for better levels of development of affordable housing, we should be doing it.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Jamie?
Yes, thanks, Chair. The Council is doing a lot to try and enable development as much as possible. That includes the recent restructure with strategic housing now sitting with the Economy and Development Service. I'm now while there was informal relationships in the past, the formal structure that's been put in place aligns my work in strategic housing with that of planning, development management, building control, and economic development. Out with the council organisations, we also organise a development forum which brings together all the registered social landlords, and that's the opportunity to highlight any blockages in development. We also hold regular quarterly meetings with all of the developers, and as you've alluded to, Scottish Water is a regular topic that is discussed. Just last week we met with the Scottish Water representative for Dumfries and Galloway discuss the ways that we can effectively unblock a lot of the problems that are found in development. We are working very closely with them. They are putting in new systems to try and enable development, including a new customer portal that's being developed at the moment. So there is a lot of partnership working. We are using our strategic influence to try and enable development as much as possible.
Okay, Willie? Thanks, Chair. I'm looking at 3.2.3 with this, and it's really to welcome the positive aspects of the Wheatley Group and recognising their 1,000 new homes over the period to 2025. The 125 million on investment to build new and improve existing. So there's a number of questions in here. I'm looking then at page 61, and hopefully this will see a turnaround where, you know, the grants, if you like, grant recipients where DGHP was as low as £0.008 million, and you compare that against some of the other housing associations that are in 6, and in fact Cunningham at 13. My questions are, when we look at this, welcoming the 1,000 homes, that we do see, you know, in fact, the finish of what was the Dix Hill regeneration programme that still is not finished in years behind in Nursery Avenue, that we see finally the completion of those homes within that as quickly as possible, and also in terms of the improving existing homes, that we maybe see some dialogue between the council and DGHP in terms of some of the houses still in the Dix Hill are prone to dampness and so forth. Maybe see some development there. And my final point, Jimmy, I've asked before, in terms of these 1,000 new homes, what dialogue there is, what discussions have taken place in terms of the 3, 4, 5 and even 6 bedroom houses that are needed on the waiting list. It's horrendous the amount of time you've got to wait for a 3-bedroom house. You know, there's just no chance in a 4, 5 and 6, as people are waiting a long time. Will the 1,000 houses see bigger builds in terms of bedroom space capacity within the programmes?
Thank you. Jamie?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, touching on the Nursery Avenue development, that is one that Wheatley Group is supporting DGHP to take that one forward at the moment. That has been in the Strategic Housing Investment Plan for quite a number of years, as Councillor Scobie's alluded to. The regeneration of Dix Hill and of many other of the sites where DGHP own a large number of housing stock has been a hot topic of discussion that we've held between the council and the Wheatley Group. So far, just last week, a number of staff from the Economy and Development Management team attended the Wheatley offices and saw firsthand their approach to regeneration in Glasgow, which was a very enlightening trip. We would hope to see that approach being taken down in Dumfries and Galloway as well. And they certainly seem to be committed to doing so. In terms of the delivery of larger homes, Nursery Avenue again is a particular case where a property is being developed to meet the needs of a very large family. We do work very actively between the Development Forum and the Common Housing Register to make sure that any developments that come forward are taking account of any particular needs that may arise, which can, as you've said, often be larger family homes, but can also be for people with disabilities, older people. So we do take a very proactive approach to trying to identify solutions to particular housing needs.
Willie, you want to come back?
Yeah, Chair, and I welcome what Jamie's saying there, and that we are maybe seeing positive development through the Wheatley Group and DGHP as a subsidiary then. But just to enlighten Jamie, and I know about the 6-bedroom house that DGHP intend building for an individual, but there has been another case for a 6-bedroom has just come up, so it's not just one. It's sometimes we need more, and we don't build, or
There's no tendency to build that size of property now, but we need to take cognizance that there's more than one. So it may be that we need to look at this again and before they are built, and hopefully that will move on in Nursery Avenue as soon as possible.
Okay, Archie?
Thanks very much, Chair. I mean, obviously, looking at the recommendations and agreeing to them, but before I do, Dougie mentioned quite rightly the Council's commitment to climate change and things like that. And as the Chair of the Strategic Housing Forum, I've asked Jamie to organise a briefing for the first Strategic Housing Forum that I'll chair on all the combined heating systems and things like that Wheatley Group are actually doing. So they're going to get their project manager down to actually do that deliberation and presentation to the Strategic Housing Forum.
I think that's very welcome, very timely. Members will move to the recommendations. Are we content to note 2.1? Agree to include Lowerburn Housing Association's refurbishment project at Melbourne Court Stranraer in the SHIP at 2.2. At 2.3, to agree to include DDHP refurbishment project at Dar Road in the SHIP. And note at 2.4 the Affordable Housing Supply Programme 1819 out-term possession. Thank you, members. Thank you, Jamie. We'll turn to item 5, which is Housing to 2040 consultation by the Scottish Government, report by Head of Economy and Development. This report provides committee with an update on the Scottish Government's Housing to 2040 consultation and seeks an agreement to a response that would be circulated to the Strategic Housing Forum prior to submission to the Scottish Government. The consultation covers a number of areas, including tackling the global climate emergency, ending fuel poverty, and eradicating homelessness. The ambition is that everyone in Scotland should live in high-quality, energy-efficient homes that are affordable and meet their needs, and to deliver this, a whole system approach is required across the country. This is important as it feeds into our local housing strategy and enables us to have a say on future housing provision. It reinforces the Council's role as Strategic Housing Authority and sets out our contribution towards the delivery of local and national priorities, including town centre regeneration, climate change duties, and the Scottish Government's target to deliver 50,000 affordable homes by 2021. Jamie Little is still in his place to respond to any questions members may have on the report. Jamie, is there anything you'd like to add?
Nothing to add at this point, Chair.
Thank you, Jamie. I'll open this to members' questions and comments. Ian.
Just a small preempt to what I'm going to say. I think in Dumfries and Galloway we do really well when it comes to delivery of affordable housing. I was reading on page 83, Principle 1, and we've got a response to that, Jamie. I just wanted to make sure, because I think we have quite a heavy reliance on the private sector, and I felt that was maybe undermining them to a small degree. I do think we rely on it, and it's important that we do have a private sector element there as well when it comes to affordable and rented housing. So I just wondered, in regards to our answer, just looking for reassurances that we are still promoting and making sure that the private sector were reliant and they're actually a strong partner for Dumfries and Galloway Council. I wouldn't like to think that in any way in regards to the response we're undermining that particular sector.
Jamie?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, obviously the private sector, as I was saying in response to Councillor James' question earlier, they have played a major role in the delivery of affordable housing in Dumfries and Galloway. That's certainly recognised, and we have regular meetings with the Scottish Government around the affordable housing supply programme. It highlights that Dumfries and Galloway has been very successful in utilising the private sector to take forward developments, and we do continue to highlight our support for that approach. The particular projects that have been taken through in terms of town centre regeneration have been great examples of what can be done in many of the more challenging buildings that we face. So as a strategic housing authority, we are highly supportive of the private sector in terms of delivering affordable housing.
Thank you, Jamie. Ian, you want to come back?
Thank you. Maybe a point I should have picked. Just so I'm absolutely clear more in mind. So in that Principle 1 on page 83, Jamie, page 9 of the actual appendix, it says investment in housing is not for the asset growth. Commercial investment in private rented sector is based on rental income return in brackets, not capital appreciation. I think I agree with that. It's a fair point. But just so I'm absolutely sure. So any investment for Scottish Government or even the Dumfries and Galloway Council when it comes to that, it's looking on the return rent, or look to that reinvested back into the quality of the housing, rather than the appreciation, so the increased value of the house or the asset that's there. The focus must be on when that capital is being invested, that grant's being supplied, that it's getting a higher level of quality of residential unit. Is that correct? Is that maybe a long-winded way of me saying it, but I think that's my understanding.
Jamie?
Thanks. Yeah, the focus of the funding is that the properties are extremely high quality. As part of the Housing to 2040 consultation, there's also a look at improving on the quality. The document attached to the appendix also sets out that there's an element of looking to be more tenure neutral in terms of the quality of product that's provided. Affordable housing is a very high quality product. It has certain space standards and certain energy efficiency standards, and looking to improve that across all sectors, including the private, and furthering that in the affordable housing sector as well.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. On page 77, you're talking about we need to mitigate the impact of climate change, yet I note there's absolutely no mention about public transport. How are we, or can we look at how we can connect public? What? I think we're being invaded.
Sharp tap of the hammer might do the trick. Andrew, you might want to start that again.
Right. As I say, we've already discussed about the impact of climate change. We have the climate change champion here, and I'm sure he would be keen to know how we can interact with public transport. We're building all these houses, and the vast majority of those houses will be occupied with people who are car owners. Is there the possibility of opening up a discussion on maybe rent rebates or something tied into how often you use public transport?
Jamie?
Thanks. The rent's obviously a matter dealt with by the registered social landlords. In terms of accessing public transport, as part of the planning process, there are a number of conditions that are put in place to make sure that any social landlords are fully considering things like bus access through any sites that they develop. We also do look to try and identify ways to make all the communities sustainable in the round. That will obviously include an element of public transport as well, as much as possible. So these are all things that are taken into account, partly through the planning process, but also in the identification of sites. Many people going into affordable housing may be elderly, may be disabled, and will be heavily reliant on the use of public transport. So we do take that into account. That's part of the RSL's development appraisal. But we also are looking at trying to use town centre sites as much as possible to positively impact on the use of any transport and try and reduce that in whatever way we can.
Thank you, Jamie. David?
Thank you, Chair, again. Is there a clear definition of affordable housing? Could I understand what affordable housing is? And I thought I might like to give Councillor Scobie the chance to explain whether he thinks there should be any kind of upper limit at all on the amount of state resources that would go to one particular large family. You know, in the interest of fairness to all families, there has to be some point at which, you know, enough is enough, to quote a famous councillor.
It's elegantly phrased, but I think we are again running the risk of straying from the matter in hand. However, on the earlier point, Jamie?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. In terms of the actual definition of affordable housing, there isn't a specific definition. What we would tend to say is, in terms of private sector rents, you're looking at something that was in line with the local housing allowance. So there's basically a local housing allowance for private sector properties, private sector rental properties, and that would be considered to be an affordable rent in the private sector. So in the social sector, it would be lower again than the local housing allowance. The rents that are set are based on the actual investment that has to go into the actual development. So the grants that are available for RSLs to develop then make the rents more affordable because the RSLs are having to invest less money into those properties. In the private ownership sector, affordable in the terms of the Affordable Housing Supply Programme really relates to the subsidy that's available being the saving that is then passed on to the purchaser of the property.
Okay. Ivor, my apologies, you were next and I misread the initials.
No problem. It's with regard to Principle 2, government policy looking to keep houses ticking along at sort of reasonable inflationary rates. But there's a note there that says may even need a period of static house prices at the bottom. Now, going back to recessions and things, you usually see house prices being static or falling. And that sort of discourages people from investing. Yet in here it says they're encouraging people to invest by having sort of housing pegged at a rate. Do you think that's right? Because personally I think we need that slight growth in there to show that things are moving forward rather than actually having the static prices. I would rather see a reasonable, in line with inflation or somewhere about there. I think they tie it to a loaf of bread, the cost rises. That's maybe where we need to be to show that there is still growth in the economy.
Jamie?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, the Council's housing need and demand assessment in 2016 identified that for many people, the average house price in Dumfries and Galloway just isn't affordable. While I agree that there does need to be an element of incentive to invest in housing prices as well, it's important that affordable housing is available to people throughout the region to make sure that they're able to access high quality properties. We identified through the housing need and demand assessment that for people who are on lower incomes, it can be extremely challenging to try and find high quality properties that meet their needs. The aspiration to deliver a static house value is obviously one of the Scottish Government's, and investment in affordable housing is really aimed at providing an opportunity for everybody to get onto either the housing ladder or into high quality affordable accommodation.
Okay. Willie?
Yeah, Chair, it's on page 89 and it's Principle 14, and I've spoken about the need for much larger properties, not just for one individual, but there are others as well that I've made reference to. But, in this principle, housing in the housing market should be highly flexible to enable people to meet their changing needs. I just wonder in this one, well, I don't wonder, what I would put forward is that we build into this some kind of incentive, because we've got large properties, we've got people sitting in 3 and 4 bedroom who are getting on in years, and it's been their family home, and they sometimes don't want to move for that reason. But if there was incentives built into to try and get those people away from the 3, 4, 5 bedroom houses and into something more suitable for their needs, then I'm sure we could get a lot of the 3s and 4s released if there was some kind of incentive, government incentive built into this Principle 14 to get those in the bigger houses, but that they could move into a smaller house, all decorated for them and so forth. Going back to district council days, there was a number of surveys done, and people would move if they thought they could just get up, stick, move, and a house was ready for them. And I think there's an opportunity here under Principle 14 to build in some kind of incentive to get the larger properties freed so that people can get more houses suitable for their needs. 3 bedroom properties are the waiting list is huge and people can't move on. I just think there's a chance here under Principle 14 to build in that incentive.
Okay, certainly recognise the problem that Willie raises in terms of the the demand, the unmet demand for larger properties, I guess, as families grow in particular. Jamie, can you assist with that?
In terms of the draft vision that's been provided, the Scottish Government do recognise that there's a particular challenge in terms of household size decreasing. It's something that certainly does occur in Dumfries and Galloway. The Housing Need and Demand Assessment also identified that the property sizes or family sizes were reducing, often one or couples in properties. An incentive that would be put in place through the construction programme, and obviously registered social landlords take this forward as part of their asset management processes, is to provide high quality accommodation for these people that they are then able to move into new 1 and 2 bedroom properties that then allows these people who are in 3 and 4 bedroom properties whose family may have moved out to then go into a new energy efficient, more suitable home that meets their needs at that time.
Okay. Willie, do you want to come back?
Yeah, I recognise what Jim has said. Yeah, and build, and if we take the example of the 1,000 houses, then yeah, there is an opportunity here to build a new home and then try and get those people out. It's that, whether there's a further incentive could be built in to try and attract people who are living in 3-bedroom houses when they only need 1 bedroom. I recognise what Jim is saying, but I think there could be scope for a further incentive to try and get those where, we're not getting the houses built in each of the locations, the localities. And there's an opportunity maybe in the housing associations to work on incentives if they knew they were getting government support.
Jamie?
So what we'll certainly do is raise that with the Common Housing Register. We're part of the board, we still are represented on that Common Housing Register, so that's something I can certainly discuss with partners to try and see if there are some more innovative ways to help people to move into these smaller properties and free up some of the larger housing stock.
Now, I guess given this is also going to the Strategic Housing Forum, it would make sense for that for that issue to be canvassed there as well. Given the people that will be around the room at that meeting, it would seem to be sensible. Okay, Stephen, you were next.
Thanks, Chair. I'm looking at page 92 where it's showing our response to the question. So it's question 1 here, and it's obviously we're welcoming the whole systems approach, but there's a couple of points in here. It was just to get a wee bit more flesh on the bones, if you like. Obviously, I welcome the fact that we've articulated that we want to mitigate reductions and continue the availability of discretionary housing payments, because obviously that's a factor in terms of balance and perhaps income issues in terms of housing, which is good. But in terms of, as you go over the page, it looks at, there's a statement there about recognising the local authorities are best placed to target investment, and I think that's a proper positioning for local, but I think we'll see items later in this agenda that look at the North Channel Partnership, our view about NUTS 2 and structural funds, Borderlands, etc., all of which are somewhere in between local and national. And I think there's, if we're talking about whole systems approach, I think we probably should have a little bit of regard for the fact that some strategic decisions might not necessarily be national and they won't be completely local, but we will have an input into something that may happen that affects our region to a greater extent than maybe locally or nationally determined. So I think it might be more complete if we're able to include something that refers to these broader south of Scotland and or Northern Ireland and west of Scotland partnership arrangements, which will have a significant impact, we hope, on economy, strategy, transport, infrastructure, all the rest of it, which in turn would go way beyond what our normal local considerations would be in terms of our housing needs. So I think there's maybe something in that.
Jamie?
Happy to amend the draft to include a little bit more information around the elements such as borderlands and the establishment of the local energy enterprise agency. That's something that can be included in the draft. I can add in a section as requested.
Okay, if the committee is content with that, I think it would be a sensible thing to do. Okay, Jim McComb, you're next.
Thanks, Chair. I'm looking at Principle 9, on page 87. And it states here, new build homes are built so that they are net zero carbon. And it then goes on and says they will use renewable heat or very low carbon heating. First question, what is regarded as very low carbon heating? And secondly, if a home is using low carbon heating, how can it be net zero carbon?
Jamie?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, in terms of low carbon heating, most electricity that's provided to a property could come from, say, something like a renewable system, solar PVs, with the backup of having access to mains electricity. That'd be considered to be a low carbon. While there is some element of carbon impact there, it's reduced as much as possible by the use of many different technologies. Obviously, the energy efficiency of the property is a key matter. In terms of a property then being net zero carbon, there's other elements that can be put into the buildings or the landscape, surrounding landscape, that can capture some of the carbon emissions that are caused by housing. It can be something simple like hedges, trees, grass. So that there are ways that developments can still be carbon neutral, even if they are creating an element of carbon at that time.
So gas is most definitely not regarded as low carbon. Is that correct?
I don't know the exact definition of gas and whether or not that is considered to be low carbon. We are working towards a target that by 2024, no new homes that are built will have a gas supply put into them. In terms of the hierarchy of what is and what isn't low carbon, registered social landlords are actively trying to use renewable sources as much as possible. District heating systems, again, these have wider objectives than just climate change, looking at fuel poverty as well. So a lot of work is ongoing to try and identify ways to reduce the carbon footprint that's caused by housing. The definition of gas, though, is not something I would know. Apologies.
Thank you, Jamie. Katie, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question I've raised before, and it's more, well, I've got 2 points. The first one is more general question about consultations. And I know it's something that I've asked before, is when we get consultations in, are elected members actually made aware of these consultations? Now, if this one has been circulated previously, apologies, I don't recall seeing it before now. And it's a request, really. We get weekly updates on planning, we get weekly updates on the forward business plans. Could we potentially get a weekly update on all the consultations coming in? Because I understand that, you know, there is a lot that we're being asked to consult on, but if we had a weekly update, it would then be up to individual members to look for that. My question specifically on this item is in regards to growing spaces and growing food networks. On question 7, the question is, do you have any proposals that would improve the space around our homes? And as far as I can see, there's no mention of food growing, of gardens, of actually anything within this consultation. And certainly under Principle 9, I believe it mentions biodiversity. There's also talk about sustainable communities. And if we're going to talk about sustainability, we really need to address our local food growing network. So I'm not exactly sure where you would want to put that in, whether under question 7, but my request is, can that be added to our response? Because certainly as a council, we have made commitments in the past to a food growing network within Dumfries and Galloway.
Jamie?
Yeah, happy to add that in at that section, or I'll certainly identify the most suitable point to mention that.
We should take away the point about consultations and notification. There used to be a mechanism for signing up directly, and the Scottish Government would then just email you everything that was coming out. I dropped off that when they changed their platforms to a new website setup. I can't conceive that they will have got rid of that, but perhaps we'll take that away and have a look at that and come back to members with a suitable method of making sure that you're kept up to speed with the consultations that are being issued. Okay, Ronnie Nicholson.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry. I'm sorry, I'm keeping my phone on because I'm waiting on a private phone call for somebody. But okay.
That's an entirely different matter. Please carry on. No problem.
Where is it? Yeah, on token investment and target investment, I noticed that, you know, we do have £1 million in Town Centre Living Fund provided by this council every year, and obviously it helps a lot of people in associations, whether they're private or public associations for housing in the town centre. Now, if we're talking about a target investment, there has to be that recognition and values of houses and that, because the value of investment in town centre may not be realised in the value of the property that is being invested in, but it will have a value to getting people into the town centre and that. And rented houses as well might not realise the investment that's been put into that house or properties in the town centre. And I think that's within this some of the answers about additional support for this forthcoming from the Scottish Government has to be. Is that being recognised in that national level, and is that forthcoming? Are they positive about that?
Jamie?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, it says the establishment of the Town Centre Living Fund was very much based around that principle that without subsidy, it's not a sound investment for a lot of people to take forward regeneration projects and even refurbishing homes in some of the town centre locations. It's not possible to realise your investment. So the establishment of the Town Centre Living Fund was really taking account of that point. Something we have pushed for heavily with the Scottish Government is for them to also enable developments within town centres to a greater extent. We do, obviously, while there are benchmark figures in terms of the grant that's available to social landlords or even the private sector through the Partnership Support for Regeneration, they do ask us for support should anybody come in with an over benchmark figure if they've identified additional costs that have occurred. So we do push that with the Scottish Government. They are keen to respond and enable regeneration projects as well, recognising the wider economic impact they have. That's obviously an aspiration for the Council and for the Scottish Government. So we work very closely in partnership with them should any of these matters arise.
Thank you, Jamie. Henry, you're next.
Thank you again, Chair. Jamie, it's question one, the response. Fully recognise and understanding there with the new housing that's currently being built. They're being built to a very high, efficient and specification. We also allude in the response to the Town Centre Living Fund. We see on the ground what's happening with social landlords in respect to what they're doing to older properties and making them much more energy efficient. But in our response, we do highlight our ambitious target to become carbon neutral as a region by 2025. And housing plays a significant role in the delivery of this. But we recognise here that there is a problem with the older, energy inefficient properties. Now, in the main, these will, outside the social landlord, these will lie in the private sector ownership. And I don't think the response in here is strong enough, because I really think we should be pushing to get that available funding and grants of some sort to allow the private sector. We seem to focus a lot on affordable housing, social landlords, but there's a significant chunk of our challenge here in the private sector, and I don't think we're stressing enough that we need that support and those grants to be available in some form to the private sector.
Okay, Jamie?
happy to take those comments on board. In terms of the response, what it does set out is that the grant funding that's available to the private sector is welcomed by Dumfries and Galloway Council, specifically around the Home Energy Efficiency Programme for Scotland, which is a solid wall insulation scheme. What suggested in the response is that a more holistic approach is available to the council to try and tackle some of the energy efficient problems that we have in the region. Many of the properties that are older may not be suitable for this type of insulation, and they may need some other measure to make them energy efficient. So there is an element of response in terms of the private sector, and happy to look to strengthen that if the members request.
I think there would be general agreement that would be a good idea. I'm not picking up any dissent on that. So if that could be done, that would be good. Thank you. Okay, David.
Thank you again. Just referring to Councillor Scobie's desire for a government scheme to encourage downsizing, you'll be pleased to know there is a scheme already in existence, colloquially referred to as the bedroom tax. We've heard of in the past call for the abolition of universal credit, and I'm worried I'm going to be outflanked on the right.
Okay, Archie, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I did, Chair. Thanks very much. I mean, and we know what the problems were when the bedroom tax came in. We saw the effects that had on lower income families across Dumfries and Galloway. And my point is, on page 82, where it has my rights, it talks about as former members of the armed forces. And we do have an armed forces housing policy that the RSLs are actually using at the moment, but I don't see it in the response. Can we make sure that there's something in there about the armed forces? Because I am part of the cross-party group looking at armed forces, and housing is a major issue within the rest of Scotland. Dumfries and Galloway has shown to be sort of light in actually having an armed forces policy within there, Jamie, so I'd like to see something in there about that.
Jamie, can we include that, please?
Yes, happy to do that. Yep.
Okay. Members, we'll move to the recommendations. Thank you for your input. I think I'll note of a number of things that can be beefed up or included. Can we then at 2.1 note the consultation? And at 2.2 agree the draft response with the additional notes that Jamie has from the points raised by members, and that will be circulated to members of the Strategic Housing Forum seeking their comments ahead of final submission to the Scottish Government by 28th February 2020. Okay, and we will take away as an operational issue the matter raised by Katie about consultations. Thanks very much, Jamie. Item 6 is Simplified Planning Zone Pilot, Hardthorn Road, Dumfries, report by Head of Economy and Development. This report seeks our approval to a draft Simplified Planning Zone scheme at Hardthorn Road, and that be published for public consultation for 6 weeks. The trial scheme will remove the requirement for planning permission, although developers will still require to apply for a building warrant and road construction consent. And the scheme will apply to first-time new build residential properties rather than to industrial buildings, and Dumfries and Galloway Council already owns the land around the proposed scheme. David Sutty is here to respond to any questions members may have on the report. David, anything you'd like to add?
No updates, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, I'll move on to members' questions and comments. Ian?
Thank you. It's quite a broad question, really, David or Jamie, maybe a combination of the two. So I think I very much support the principle of this, and it meets a number of the Council's objectives. So it's obviously there's affordable housing here. There's I suppose that there's quite a number of things that within the local housing strategy it meets objectives. There's even capital receipts when it comes to that, because it's council-owned land, this one in particular. So I just wondered in regards to, we quite often talk about the performance, but full cost recovery, we try and get that in regards to the plan and such like. So is there, when it comes, somebody comes forward to take this, is there any potential loss of income? I know we'll get a capital receipt, that's one point. How do we actually measure the performance of this? So in 3 years' time, how do we actually find out that actually this simplified planning zone has actually been successful?
David?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that is a factor. Basically, it does require the planning authority to put the effort in up front to actually produce the guidance notes and the plot passports and so on. In this particular instance, because the council actually owns the land, then you're correct, the receipt would come in from that. This is a pilot programme really just to see across Scotland how viable these are going to be in the long term, because simplified planning zones, or SPZs, were originally designed really for industrial purposes. And this is, there was, I think, 3 pilots across Scotland that were looking at how could this be translated into being used for housing. So in answer to your question, yes, you do lose the planning application fee, but critically on this site here, this is probably a site that might not have been brought forward otherwise, that would enable a development to take place on this land, and it would be providing something which we recognise that there is a desire for in the area of self-build plots. So for all those reasons, we think it is something that's worth pursuing.
Ian, you want to come back?
I suppose then we may well see it through our general performance reports that come back, but I'm thinking a long term, 2-3 years time from now, so that we've got consultation come back and say in principle that it's agreed and it moves forward. And because it's a pilot, we need to understand and see in future at some point, okay, this has been a success, or if it's failed, why has it failed? And just, I think it's important that we do see that.
I would agree with that. And David, I'm guessing that there will require to be assessment of how the pilot's actually performed.
Absolutely. This is something which the Scottish Government were happy to give grants out to a number of authorities that were willing to try this out. But it is something which they very much are interested in, want to see what comes back. The only one, to my knowledge, in Scotland at the moment is still being developed out, is one in Glasgow. But it is cutting edge. There are very, very few around the country as a whole. So yes, we would take all that back.
Okay, if that's helpful. Dougie?
Thanks, Chair. Just to tie in with the discussion we're having when Jamie was talking about the Scottish Government target of 2024 for renewable energy or low carbon heating systems. I'm just wondering if we're missing an opportunity here in this particular report in relation to sustainable design. When in the first line it says that we expect these houses to go beyond the standards and demonstrating low carbon and ecological living. I couldn't find any specific reference to renewable energy or low carbon heating systems, but does this project not provide an opportunity to sort of set the standard in advance of the Scottish Government's 2024 target? Or is it implicit in the report itself? I'm just wondering if it could be strengthened and more explicit in what we want in terms of the heating systems used in these properties when they're built.
David?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, this is covered to a degree on page 117 and 18 of your agenda papers. I suppose the difficulty that we have is that it can only be an aspiration in as far as the current building standards are the limits that we can actually insist on. There is clearly an aspiration what we would like people to do, and that's alluded to in the scheme that you see before you. To actually enforce it beyond that is going to be quite difficult, but I'm quite happy to take a look at this again, see if there's any way we can actually beef that up a bit and give a bit more steer in that general direction. As you rightly point out, by 2024, the heating systems will change anyway.
Dougie, you want to come back?
Yeah, that's good, David. It's just I'm thinking 2024 is not far away, and you know we've got the potential of houses being built with systems thereafter very quickly. We've got new regulations in place that essentially outdate those previous regulations. So it's trying to bear that in mind and how we address that. Thanks.
Okay, Ivor?
Chair, I may be looking a bit too far in front, but when it comes to, say this goes through, can I come in and say, well, I like plots 3 and 6 and buy the 2 passports for that and just build those 2 plots? Or is it a case I have to buy all of the plots? And do we know currently with all the work we've done that we can actually get water into them? Can we get sewage into them? Because going back a couple of years there was concerns about putting more houses over in the DG2 area because of constraints on sewage and stuff, but I don't know if it was up this end or down at the including end. So is the site developable as well? Do we know that? Because, you know, if we're going to go down the road of doing the work to actually bring it forward to say this is acceptable, and then we find out that whenever you come in and buy a plot, you can't actually deliver it because there's no water or sewage connection.
David?
Chair, to the best of our knowledge, yes, it is developable. It's identified in LDP2 as, as a housing development site. So the work has been done at that stage. The intention here is it's a two-stage process, effectively, where we're looking for a party, which could be the council itself. It could be, we're in discussions with what Jamie was referring to earlier, which was the Dumfries and Galloway Small Communities Housing Trust, to develop this for certainly the affordable element within this development, possibly more than that. But once that has actually been put in as the infrastructure, the intention is then each individual plot to be available to be purchased on the open market. So anybody could come along and, subject to getting a building warrant for it, they can just go and build it. They don't need a separate planning application. It's very much based on the model you'll find in the likes of the Netherlands, where actually it's the local authority that does all the enabling work. They get the land, it's identified for development. They put in the infrastructure such as the roads and the drainage and water, and then sell off individual plots to members of the public. And it's a very similar idea with a plot passport. So it's just trying to see if that European continental model is transferable across here.
Just for the avoidance of doubt, since it has been raised, members will be aware of my previous declaration of interest with regard to Dumfries and Galloway Small Communities Housing Trust. Clearly, if this becomes an issue and they are a factor in future decisions we make over the site, I won't take any part in disposal or any arrangements. However, this is a report which is simply on the simplified planning guidance and the request that I go out to public consultation. So I don't consider I have a conflict of interest in that regard, but nevertheless, since the organisation has been mentioned, I would wish to be clear and transparent with members about what would happen if they become a factor in future decisions. Is there any other member? David.
Thank you, Chair. It's somewhat typical of us as a planning authority to ignore context, and it's probably just not a coincidence that we've got little snapshots of what's good and what's maybe bad design with no surrounding. I think we all know that when we travel to other areas where they've had good planning control, the sheer aesthetic capital that they've built up and retained, and also how easy it is to actually lose that by sporadic development. It's a regret to me. I've never made any progress in making this argument in the council. We need to think about context in planning, and also, beyond that, there should be a need for a palette from which you can choose, so that things fit together and have a style. It could be at district level, even doesn't have to be right across Dumfries and Galloway. But I see here that the boundary treatments, there's a definition of what's permissible and what's not. Will that be the case for the buildings themselves, or would there still be a potential to do that and pilot that in this case, that there would be a palette of materials and looks?
David?
To a degree, the purpose of this is to allow self-build properties to actually be done to the desire of the individual who purchases it. But the guidance here does give clear steers as to what is and isn't acceptable, and the plot passports then go down in some more detail on exactly what that is. And a scheme has to be submitted to the authority for consideration, although it's not a formal approval in the sense of a planning application. So there is that element of control and consistency to a limited degree, but it's not the same as a normal planning application. That's kind of the purpose of an SPZ.
Okay, Stephen?
Thanks, Chair. I love coffee, but it just won't grow in my garden. Now, I appreciate this has been inspired by something that's happened in the Netherlands, but I think there's an awful lot of other factors in the Netherlands that might allow for things to happen a different way there than they do here. That's not to say it's not worth trying, but I'm just sort of wondering, the vision is to offer people, basically individuals to self-build. It seems to be that's the intention. I would be concerned that you'd have 12 passports, one developer buys the lot and then does them a certain way, and that's that. So the intention gets lost in the implementation because the ecology, if you like, is different from the original source of the idea. So is there something that could be firmed up in that, or do we have something that could make that deliverable, that it's actually individuals or small concerns that can take each of the plots and take them forward, or is there a risk that we lose the intention because one developer takes it all on?
David?
Chair, yes, that is very much one of our concerns as well. One of the reasons we chose this site is because it is actually a council-owned site, so that we have a lot more control than over an SPZ, which was in private hands. So from our perspective, it does allow us to actually ensure who it goes to and how it is taken forward.
Okay. Ronnie?
Thanks. I just welcome this report, and I welcome this, this going ahead with individuals having the right to design their own houses and that. The plot itself, I don't think the photograph does it justice in page 109, where it is. I'm not sure how old that photograph is at the top, but behind there, that's where the new design DGHP houses are, and they've created a bit of, discussion, if you want, when they were being designed. And I think, they're really good houses now, and they're energy efficient. There's individuality with them, but a particular design that fits in. You've got the DGHP older houses, ex-council houses, next to them. So that clashes, if you want, or it's different from that design. Across the road, you've got individual houses that have been built right along the road, and they're all particularly individual houses, are not some uniform design. So I think that location is a good way to test this out, and good luck with it.
Thank you, Ronnie. Andrew?
Just to say, Chair, I think we should move to recommendations. I think it's a tremendous report. I love the idea of simplified planning. Not too sure about zoning, but anyway, we've got to move forward. So, yeah, go to the recommendations.
Okay, that's exactly what we shall do. So at 2.1, we're asked to agree the draft simplified planning zone scheme is detailed Appendix 1, and that is published for 6 weeks public consultation. Are we content to agree that? David has said that he will look at the specific issues that Dougie had raised. And at 2.2, agree to receive a report back to this committee with the outcome of the public consultation, along with any proposed changes. Are we content to agree that? Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. Item 7 is Local Development Plan 2, Planning Guidance on Windows and Doors in Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas, report by Head of Economy and Development. This report seeks our approval to adopt the planning guidance within the appendix on windows and doors in listed buildings and conservation areas. This guidance is intended to provide more detail for people who want to repair, alter or replace windows or doors in their property. Marie Marshall is here to respond to any questions members have on the report. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Not at this time.
Okay, we'll move straight to members' questions and comments. Leader.
Thanks. It's with reference to page 163 and the planning permission needed to replace windows and doors in a conservation area or particularly in a listed building. I wonder, is planning permission required when a door or window is repainted in a listed building area, particularly if it's repainted of a different colour to the previous one?
Okay. David, do you want to do that?
Chair, in a word, yes. Basically, if you're applying colour to any building or parts thereof in a conservation area or to a listed building, then the permitted development rights say that that needs an application for planning permission.
Yeah. I just wondered whether that could be made clear, because this has been a bone of contention in a prominent building in Dumfries town centre, with the developer believing they didn't need to have planning permission to repaint the door, and others believing it. So I just wondered whether that could be made clear for people in future.
I think that is a good point. Can that be included? Because it is strictly speaking a repair.
Technically, because it is counted as development, then yes, it probably should be mentioned more explicitly in this, just so members of the public are aware of that. Happy to put that in.
I think that would be helpful. Thank you. Ian?
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Mr. Report. So just looking on page 169, just so I'm clear, because we've had a lot of in plan applications and listed consent applications, PVC and listed and conservation areas have been quite a bit of discussion. So seeing that top row of pictures contained within the box, you've got picture number 4, so that's saying that's a PVC window, and it's acceptable. I just want to make sure that's the case. That's what we're saying. Okay, that's acceptable. But I would imagine there could be a variation allowed to that. So because I do think that's fine. It looks, standing back, that looks absolutely fine. But the one next to it, I think, is of timber construction. But I would imagine if the PVC one looked very similar to the one on the left, the one next to it would be acceptable as well. Just, I don't know how absolutely specific we're being here. So is it that type of PVC and nothing else? But when you've got the 4 panes, I think a 2 pane's fine, but also you should be allowed 4 pane. Maybe that is acceptable.
Okay.
I think the purpose of the windows is to show the variety that are available, but in listed buildings, the PVC is not acceptable in normal circumstances. So that's what's going forward. This doesn't really refer to any particular type of building. It's just a general example.
I maybe misunderstood that. So when I was looking and read that there, I thought that number 4 was a PVC window, and that's because it had a tick beside it. It was acceptable. Have I misread that?
Yeah, but it doesn't say whether it's acceptable. It doesn't say whether it's a listed building or a conservation area. In listed buildings, the PVC windows are generally not acceptable.
Yeah, I've got a bit of a problem with that, Chair. I do think, I've got a particular view where I do think if they're to that standard, and maybe that's out with this remit.
I take it that might fall under not normally acceptable. That might depend on circumstance and the quality of what has been proposed.
Well, the basic premise is that basic premise of the policy is that UPVC would not be the first choice or the recommended choice for a listed building. But within the report, there may be occasional circumstances where that does come across as being acceptable. But the first port of call is to say the principle is not acceptable. So on that would be in order to preserve historic fabric, character, and also to encourage people to look at other methods of improving the performance of their window without necessarily resorting to a carbon-based material or an oil-based material to replace timber.
Okay. Ian, you want to come back?
I think it was Whithorn in particular with the case forward as a local review body, and the extreme weathers, it almost sitting like a peninsula, and I think it was a listed building anyways, and there was a real issue in regards to that. So I think in some cases, absolutely, PVC, your timber products should be preserved at all costs, and it kind of refers to that. Okay, once you get beyond 50% of the window, I think it's beyond a point in time where you can actually recover that, really, and you can look at a full replacement window rather than a repair. But I do think that in some circumstances, it's absolutely the right thing to do, because there was high levels of wind, storms, these type of buildings. Middle of Dumfries might be different, but when I look at that, I think, okay, it is acceptable, but subject to meeting the right criteria. But what I've heard for yourself is that it's an absolute last resort. It should, and the council would be against it. When I see the tick against it, well, my interpretation of that would be actually that, okay, it's okay under the right circumstances, but that's not what I've heard, Chair.
David?
It's probably worth making a number of points. This document here, to a large degree, actually is formalising what this is the 2-sheet piece of paper that officers have been using for many years. If we get inquiries from members of the public as to what processes they would have to go through and the likely acceptability of it. Just to give members a bit of background, there was a fundamental change in planning legislation nationally in 2012, where any development in a conservation area now requires a grant of planning permission. So perhaps the error, if you like, going in this neck of the woods was that we had conservation areas declared in the 1970s, but they never followed through with what was called an Article 4 direction, which removed permitted development rights. So I've worked in other authorities where it was very much the case everybody understood a conservation area meant that you had to use traditional materials, traditional design, and you had to get planning permission for doing them. Here we never had the Article 4s, which meant removing permitted development rights. So when I started working in Annandale and Eskdale, for example, you go to Langham, and people could quite legitimately, in an outstanding conservation area, replace all their windows with UPVC and not require planning permission. Now that led to a sort of a change in the appearance of those areas, but in national legislation that changed in 2012, so now people require permission. So really what this is doing, it's saying we actually need to have some guidance to people. Clearly there's a steer from the Scottish Government. They feel conservation areas are worthy of retention. And you've got to look as well at the wider picture, which is actually the economic benefits to the area, because if the area is attractive, then people are going to want to come and visit it, and the tourist spend that goes there. Why do people go to the Lake District, the Peak District, York, Edinburgh, you name it? People go to those places because of the historical character to them, which makes them attractive. So we had that change in 2012. This is trying to take things forward. We have made quite a considerable change in that we actually allow UPVC sash and case windows in a conservation area now. So we are quite happy to accept those in the correct context. The listed building side of things, they are given a special status by Historic Environment Scotland. So they're listed not by the council but by part of the Scottish Government, and they have to be given a certain status. We have had a couple of instances in the last few years where appeals on the specific merits of the case actually awarded listed building consent for plastic windows. But it is a process that we go through. We look in a flow of can the windows be repaired? If not, then we obviously want to have sustainable use of materials, but also to make sure that they're energy efficient. So I think as long as people understand when we're talking about timber windows, we're not talking about, unless it's a Category A listed building, single pane windows. What we're talking about is double glazed windows, which would give all the thermal efficiency that you would expect of UPVC. It's just an inherently more sustainable product in that it's timber rather than plastic.
Okay. Ian, you want to come back, and then we shall move on?
Well, I suppose I'm getting reassurance that actually timber is the preferred or traditional materials, but I mean I still very strongly feel that, I don't know if we can change it at this point, we've got it in front of us and it's explained through pictures that PVC should be an option. It's maybe an option of last resort, but it should be an option for in particular circumstances you do find yourself in. It was the inclement conditions in Whithorn in particular, but it's with a lot of coastal areas in this area. These people had replaced their traditional sash and case windows for about 10 years beforehand, and because of the weather conditions, they're gone in within 10 years or rotten. That's the reasons they were wanting to change them to a look. So you stand back, you look 10 paces back, you can hardly tell the difference unless you've got an awfully good eye. But ultimately, I think there should be leeway in regards to, under certain circumstances, that we should be allowed to use a particular material type that is both has longevity and higher level of U values.
Okay. Andrew?
There's a chance, David. How often do we actually review conservation areas?
David?
Well, in my time here, we've done conservation area character appraisals for a number of conservation areas, but there is actually a programme going ahead to review conservation areas, which we are hoping to bring to this committee in the near future. But at the minute we have 36 conservation areas. Some on surface assessment seem as if they may no longer have the value they had once, and in terms of their historic appearance and architectural interest. So we are planning, as the local development plan team, we are going to take forward a superficial and then a more in-depth review of the conservation areas.
Andrew?
Just come back in. I heard David talk about areas being attractive. We've just agreed the simplified planning zone. If that was to be attractive, would that then be deemed an area for conservation?
David? No, simply because you're looking at something that is historical before it's actually deemed to be a conservation area. There's a whole CACAMP process which Mizzy goes through in assessing all of those to justify it. So are we building the conservation areas of tomorrow was a question which was asked a number of years ago, but at the moment certainly any new build couldn't be considered for a conservation area.
Just one final point, and that is really just to get to understanding the designs that are being presented here. Are they fit for purpose for the future, or will there be further changes?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by the question. In terms of materials, we obviously only know the materials we have at present. I do know that there have been changes in the longevity of softwood more recently because of special treatment of the wood. But certainly pre-war wood is significantly more sustainable and lasts a lot longer than post-war wood, I'd say World War I. But with this new acetylization, I think it's called, of softwood, that has the same appearance, but it has very good longevity. And there are also hardwoods, and some of those are produced locally. So at the minute, I haven't got any other materials we can offer.
Okay, Stephen?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, no, I think David sort of helped address it, but I think I was looking at this report wondering, well, what has changed? And effectively, this is really just a codification and a clarification of what we do already. And it's helpful on page 166 and 167, just the column for unlisted buildings and conservation areas. I think, that's maybe where a lot of the questions might arise sometimes, because certainly, as Councillor Carruthers alluded to, it's been often the case at local review bodies, certainly when I've been involved in them, where windows, it's not the appearance so much as the material that seems to be the issue sometimes. And obviously, given when David referred to the other piece of circular we didn't implement here, the horse had very much bolted in a lot of cases, so it seemed to be, finger in the, well, there's probably an analogy, but I can't think of it. But it does also leave room at 3.2 where this type of guidance can be updated quickly. So there is scope within the life cycle of this where, if there is a sort of significant issue, then at least we can change it without going through a whole massive bureaucratic cycle. So that's some comfort. Thank you.
That's a very good point. David, is there anything you want to add?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. This is not supplementary planning guidance that you would have that's adopted as part of the LDP. It's a local document, and it doesn't need to go through the Scottish Government, and it can be changed very quickly if required.
Okay, potentially it's something that might have to be revisited once we understand better which conservation areas we're going to continue to conserve. We'll move to the recommendations. We're asked to adopt the guidance as detailed in the appendix. Are we content to do so? Thank you. Thank you both. Item 8 is the response to Scottish Government's Planning Performance and Fees Consultation report by Head of Economy and Development. This report advises on the Scottish Government's Planning Performance and Fees Consultation and seeks our approval to the draft response to the consultation questions. We are advised that the consultation looks at two aspects of planning reform. Firstly, the mechanism for annual performance reporting by each planning authority, and secondly, changes to the planning fee structure and non-statutory charging. David Sutty is still with us to respond to any questions members may have on the report. David, is there anything you'd like to add?
Chair, very minor update. The actual consultation didn't have a numbered set of questions. So when I drafted an initial covering report, I said 153. It is 152, as you'll see in the appendix.
Do we get an extra answer for free? Perhaps not. Members will move straight to comments and questions. Leader?
I'm just referring to page 187 and the maximum total for wind farms up being 150,000. I felt that still seems to be a little low given the amount of work which can be required in the processing of a planning application for a major wind farm development. And I just wondered whether in our response, point 36 on page 194, we ought to be making the case for a higher reimbursement for these major
applications. David?
Chair, yeah, there is a valid point there, because if you look across the border in England, the maximum fee which they have for applications is £250,000. So there is still a disparity there between Scotland and England. It has considerably gone up in the last few years. We were talking about 60-odd thousand before, so it has considerably gone up in a few years. But I would have no objections if members wish to ask for a greater sum on that.
If we're using the principle of cost recovery, is there any concern on that? It appears members in agreement on that point. So if you can add that in, that would be helpful. Are there any other comments or questions? David?
Thank you. Technical question on the when is an application area-based rather than unit-based? And then also on page 186, agriculture buildings, £0. You know, farms are businesses. We want to support them, but why would they have a zero fee and other businesses would pay a fee? And I think there's a lot of goodwill, and I think they have a great chance when they put in an application that they'll be successful. So perhaps they should pay. And I don't think. Yes, it does mention pre-application scheme in here. Is that bedded? Has that bedded in well, and is it working as well as anticipated? I know I welcomed it at the time. I would just like an update on that. Thank you.
Okay, David.
Yes, units and area. This is something which the Scottish Government have always done. It's usually a unit is where it's an individual element, such as a dwelling house, or where you've got a discrete thing, such as an extension. Areas are more commonly used for planning permission in principle, where you're looking at a red line around a site, so you obviously don't know the number of units. It is also used as the measure on square meterage for the floor area for many things as well. It's just historically been the way they've always calculated it. In terms of pre-application inquiries, yes, that has bedded in very well. It's been very successful, and indeed the agents and applicants generally seem to appreciate it because it gives them the certainty that they need before investing in a full planning application. So it's certainly something we wish to continue. And I think the other one was agricultural. The zero fee is very specifically for a case where it would have normally been a permitted development. It's under 465 square metres. And all you need to do is submit this rather unhappy halfway house called a determination of prior approval. I don't think you'll find many planners or indeed farmers in Scotland who like that. But I've made comments in the response suggesting that they really look closely again at that. I think it works far better if you either need planning permission or you don't. But at the moment, if you need to put an agricultural shed up of below 465 square metres, then you need to spend 76, or as we're proposing, £100 for a determination of prior approval application. But if you actually go and jump the gun and start work and it's a retrospective application, it's zero fee. So it needs to be level playing field. I've made comment on that they either need to do away with the whole DPA process or make it exactly the same.
It's probably where I should have given my conflict of interest, which I didn't know that was coming, but I should have known that which way around that would have worked. It would have been advantageous to me. So thank you anyway.
Okay, thank you. Any other member? Okay, in that case we shall move quickly to the recommendations. At 2.1, we're asked to note the Scottish Government's planning performance and fees consultation. We intend to note. And at 2.2, agree the draft response to the consultation questions as set out in the appendix, with the addition requested by the leader, which members are content with. Are we content to agree that? Thank you very much. Thank you, David. Item 9 is the Stranraer Conservation Area Regeneration Scheme report by Head of Economy and Development. We're presented with a report on the progress of the Stranraer Conservation Area Regeneration Scheme. This is part of a national programme to conserve Scotland's traditional buildings and support the economic regeneration of town centres. The Stranraer CARS is enabled by funding from Dumfries and Galloway Council and Historic Environment Scotland, with investment of around £921,000 from the Council and £541,000 from Historic Environment Scotland, plus a further contribution from the owners of the properties. The report proposes increasing the flexibility of the grant programme by offering grants at a rate of up to 90%, an increase on the previous 60% for eligible works up to any value. It also updates us on the spending profile for the scheme. Pam Taylor is here to respond to, and Steve Rogers as well, welcome both, is here to respond to any questions members may have on the report. Is there anything either of you would like to add?
Nothing to add, thanks, Chair.
Okay, in that case, we'll move straight to questions and comments. Andrew?
Thank you for letting me in, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. One's around the original budget of 3.4, 1.6 million, and we've only spent about a third of that. Although below it says that the rest of the funds are fully committed on work on the museum and Gillespie's Bakery. When do we expect those works to be completed? There's also an aspect of training, education, administration. How much of the funding goes towards training and education, and who are we training and educating? I'll start off with that as a question.
Okay, who's going to take those? Pam?
Thank you. The original budget is the budget that we are still working to in terms of the division of costs across the project broadly, with the exception of the funds that were originally allocated for works to the Dixon and Main building, which was one of the priority buildings identified in consultation with Historic Environment Scotland prior to the funds being awarded, and the owners of that building have elected to withdraw from the scheme, and therefore those are the funds that we have to reallocate. The other funds are at varying stages in terms of their actual spend, but the total budget that we're working to for those other elements of the project remain broadly the same, if not identical, to how they were at the start of the project.
Okay.
Education and training is something which is in progress at the moment. We are discussing with the college and with Stranraer Academy how we can best utilise those funds. What we had originally pursued was, in consultation with Enterprising DG, supporting apprenticeships, because that was a priority for Historic Environment Scotland, but because of the structural changes that have occurred within the council, we haven't been able to develop that line in the way that we had originally intended. So at the moment we're looking at alternative ways in which those funds can be best utilised.
Okay, Andrew, you want to come back?
Thanks, Jim. And my other point now is on 3.6. We've received 60 inquiries on from applicants and private businesses and homeowners in the conservation area. But there's no mention, so we've had a mention of how many inquiries we've had, but there's no mention of how many have actually went through to fruition. From what I get from this, it sounds like very few, because there's a statement saying affecting the commitment of the property owners to developing full applications. So that sounds like we've not had very many. And a wee comment that I've always kind of had from the whole time for the CARS project is that it looks like we've made a project fit we're trying to make the place fit the project rather than the project fit the place. That's just a wee comment that I've got, but if I could just get those figures about how many have actually went through to.
No.
I think, Chair, yes, through you, Chair. I mean, the answer to your initial question is that we have a number of grant applications that are at an advanced stage. However, what we've found is, and Pam can probably fill in some detail on this, is that the specific requirements from Historic Scotland as part of the scheme, a lot of the kind of conservation requirements, because this is a conservation area scheme, combined with the kind of relatively low property values within Stranraer itself, is acting as a bit of a barrier, which is why we've taken the unusual step of going back to Historic Environment Scotland and saying, look, this isn't working for us in Stranraer. We're going to need to up the level of intervention here if we want to make the impact that we intended to make at the beginning. So that's the context as to why we're asking for the grant intervention rate to be increased to 90%.
Okay, Jim McComb.
Thanks, Chair. I'm concerned in 3.7 that the change is to increase the rate of property grant from 60% to 90% for eligible works, up to any value. Now that is an extremely open-ended offer, and there is a real danger that instead of benefiting the whole of the town centre, 2 or 3 individuals are going to make use of the entire property upgrading fund. That I understood this was to benefit the totality of the town centre, and there really is a danger that it will not happen, that 2 or 3 people will benefit substantially from this, and the rest of the town centre will remain as it is.
Pam, you want to take that one?
Thank you. The nature of the scheme and the conditions that we have to work to are set very strictly by Historic Environment Scotland. We have sought as much flexibility as we possibly can in the way that we have tried to implement the scheme to make it as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. However, the nature of it is such that people need to get at least 3 quotes for any work that they want to carry out. For example, the grant award comes with a clawback clause which is binding for 10 years on that property if it's sold, whereby money has to be paid back throughout that time. And those are the sorts of things that are acting as a disincentive for people who are interested in smaller scale grants. The conditions, it's felt by many people, are maybe not worth pursuing in terms of the financial award that people get. As the grant award goes up, people become obviously more inclined to work with all of the various conditions and criteria that are associated with the grant, and therefore it becomes more attractive to them. There are also a number of properties that currently fall out with the scope of the works that we can support because of the value of the works that need carried out on them, but they would have a significant impact if they were improved on the overall appearance of Stranraer, and therefore there are some schemes potentially that we're aware of at the moment that would be worthwhile in terms of fulfilling the aims of this grant. We would still be assessing every application that comes forward very carefully, both internally through our own systems of scrutiny and authorisation and in consultation with Historic Environment Scotland.
Okay, Jim, you want to come back?
Could you give an indication how many schemes would be likely to proceed on account of these changes to the grant provision?
At the moment, we've got, with all of the inquiries that have come forward, these have all been followed up on a one-to-one basis with property visits and so on. Around 22 people have come forward with the expression of interest stage, which is the first phase of the application process. There are about 10 of those which we feel would still be likely to proceed if we're able to make the overall offer sufficiently attractive to people. There are some that we had some properties we had inquiries about where people have subsequently gone and done their own works, so we don't expect that those will be resurrected in terms of an application, but I would say there are 10 at the moment that we feel could be actively pursued.
Archie, on that?
Yeah, just on that point here, I've got the opposite concern with Jim, is that if we don't up this grant scheme, then we won't have more people coming forward, and we need to see some kick-starting in the Stranraer cares area. So I fully support what's actually happening here. I can understand your concern, but I think if we get this going, we might get some more interest from other parties who want to work within the Stranraer area. We need to get this one moving.
I think it is a fair point, Archie. I mean, we should recall that there has not been a great deal of interest at 60% of up to any limit. And I think we need to look at what we can do in order to actually get some of this money spent for the benefit.
Thanks, Chair. I'm quite happy with the principle of upgrading the scheme. I have no problem with that. The phrase I have a problem with, eligible works up to any value. That is an extremely open-ended commitment.
Okay, note that, and we will revisit that if you wish to when we come to the recommendations.
Thanks, Chair. And the 60 inquiry figure, this was something that was reported to the Wigton Area Committee, I think, I'm looking at my diary, and if not November, then even before November. So the 60 figure has remained static since it was reported to the Area Committee. So there does not appear to be many others coming in interested in the scheme. And I think it's that interest we got to focus on, because Steve referred to there about barriers. I think these restrictions that are put on people are stopping them coming forward. And even if you were to increase it to 90% with still the same restrictions, then there will be very little uptake, because Andrew did ask the figure, for the figure, and Steve didn't provide it, but Pam started to provide it, where out of the 60, which has been long outstanding figure, we've got an interest of 20 to 21. And many have gone and done their own work, taken away the restrictions, and then proceeded to do the work for themselves without the grant. So I think we've seriously got to look at what these restrictions are that's stopping people coming forward, and fulfilling the objective of what we're offering them there. So we've got to do that. And the other question, I think, my question to Pam and Steve, when is the final date? Because in 3.6 it talks there about programme timeline. So as we move on, we're going to run out of time, and that money would have to be paid back because of these restrictions. So I think we've really got to address those restrictions. And another point in the report, and it's at 3.9, and really the Council is not being clever on this one. We've really got to get smarter, because we're talking about the Stranraer Museum and the work that's required on the Stranraer Museum. We spent, or time was spent almost 3, 4, 5 months with a road closure in Church Street in Stranraer. And there could have been an opportunity, or there should have been an opportunity, and I've made that point in the past, that the museum, the roof, be examined while Church Street was closed. We now have Church Street reopened from the 24th of December, and we're not talking about reclosing it for a 4-hour period to do the inspection of the roof when Church Street was already closed. And then, once we know what the state of the roof is in, to further close Church Street sometime in the spring, possibly, for a longer period. That wasn't clever in how we've approached this when we knew the museum was part of this scheme. And really, it doesn't do the Council's credibility any good at all, and makes us look pretty stupid in the eyes of the public when we're doing these kind of things with the museum and closing Church Street again.
Okay, Steve?
Chair, yes, through you, taking the last point first, we'll certainly look to minimise any disruption associated with this work and with any future works at the George Hotel. And I think there are also lessons that have been learned in terms of communication, which will certainly be taken on board. With regard to the point about the restrictions associated with the grant scheme, the restrictions, the issues with the restrictions are things that we can feed back, and we have been feeding back to Historic Environment Scotland, because these are not of our making. They're part of the conditions of grant that came from Historic Environment Scotland. So it's important that we continue to give them that feedback so that they can review and look at how they operate these programs on a national basis.
I think that's two very important points. These are not necessarily rules that we're making. And while I don't want to, I'll bring you back in a minute, while I don't want to preempt a future report, we're not going to redevelop the George Hotel without closing Church Street again, possibly. But we are where we are with that. And it will be exceptionally frustrating, I don't doubt, but we must get both buildings done properly, and both have a big contribution to make to the regeneration of Stranraer Town Centre. The George Hotel in particular, since it stands at the moment looking like a bomb site, although it's a safe building, and will continue and will require a great deal of work in order to be brought up to a standard where it can contribute to the community for years to come. However, you want to come back.
Chair, I hear what you've got to say, and I heard what Steve had to say in terms of lessons being learned. It wasn't a matter of lessons being learned. This was flagged up well before when George Street was closed, that we should have been inspecting the roof then, that would have saved that, at least, closure to happen. So, well, it's easy to say lessons have got to be learned. We should have been doing that when it was flagged up by members, not just myself on that one. There wasn't what's the final date? We didn't get that, and fully spent within the CARS programme time frame. When is that date? Yeah, because it must be coming pretty close.
Do you have an end date for the programme?
Yep, the funds need to be spent by March 2021, so we have until then. So there is sufficient time to allocate all of the funds that we have available with the alterations to the delivery that are within our gift to change. And as has been highlighted, there are many of the conditions which we can't change because of the nature of the scheme.
Okay, thank you for that. Katie?
Thank you, Chair. Yep, I'm having a look through our recommendations, and the first one is to note the progress. Now, there's been concerns raised on various issues, one of which was the Training, Education and Engagement Programme, but there appears to be missing detail. How much have we got? How much have we spent? How much is allocated to training? The actual details of that, and certainly in the future items, we're going to be looking at 6-month reviews of where we are. There's a lot of detail missing in here. So while we can note what we've got before us, it would be really helpful to actually know, well, how much has been allocated for training and education, and what is our future plans. In a previous committee, we were looking at the town centre living funds, and we got a big long list of these were everybody that had applied, these were green lighted, these were red, these are amber. Again, that information's lacking. So I am disappointed at the lack of information that we've got before us. I understand it's a big project, and I am heartened to see that HSC have said that they're content in principles for the grant to be increased by 90%. Have they confirmed up to any value? Because that obviously is the key point that Councillor McComb has raised with a concern. So while they have agreed that 90% is a reasonable allocation, just in terms of the maximum value on that one. But would it be possible to get further information just as to what are all the applications that have come in? Have they progressed? Will they progress? Will they not? And why not? Just because that level of detail is missing in this 3-page report before us.
Okay, Steve, on
yes.
further detail?
We're happy to circulate that information to members out with the committee meeting.
Okay, grateful if you could do that. Ronnie?
Just a question, there's 10, 11 people went ahead and done the work themselves. That saved probably £120,000, which can be spent in other work. Now, if they'd have got that money wouldn't have been there. But did the work they do come up to the standards from Historic Scotland or not?
Well, it would have all needed both planning permission and potentially listed building consent, depending on the nature of the property. So we do have those other controls in place to ensure that there is a consistency of approach.
Okay. Andrew, you wanted to come back in?
Actually, it's just more of a learning point. So we've seen a learning curve here, and I understand that Dumfries has got a conservation area regeneration coming up. Do we have lessons, and do we have good ground to go forward so that we know exactly where some of the issues are, so that we're not going to face these again in the future?
Steve?
Chair, yes, there is a bid currently sitting with Historic Environment Scotland to create a scheme within Dumfries, and certainly we have taken on board a lot of the lessons learned from this scheme in terms of how that particular proposal has been shaped.
Okay, thank you for that. Members, we'll move to the recommendations. Stephen?
Sorry, Chair, I thought you'd noted my interest earlier on. Yeah, it was also just to ask about the detail. I'm not sure why it needs to leap to 90%, and it would be helpful if there was a kind of upper limit. I understand from your answers previously you kind of have sight of the people who are interested in taking projects forward, so there will be a kind of known quantum, if you like, in mind, I would imagine, whereby you would know what an upper limit would be that would benefit the most number of stakeholders, insofar as we can support funding for that. I'm a little bit conscious that we obviously care more about conservation areas than the people who live there, because we can't get rid of the money, and we're asking for more to prop up something that hasn't worked very well to date. So I think it would be helpful to get clarity on the maximum, if you like, that people can apply for. And is there any reason why it goes up to 90%, not 80%, for example? And just a wee further note, Councillor Nicholson did raise the question about why would 10 or 11 people have gone ahead, spent their own money, when there was 60% of the funding available, when they would have had to meet the same building or planning requirements anyway. Seems counterintuitive to me, but that's people.
Okay, Pam?
People wouldn't have to meet exactly the same standards in order to comply with planning conditions as they would to comply with the grant requirements of this scheme. So, for example, under the CARS scheme, people can only have grant towards work that is carried out using traditional materials such as timber, windows and lime mortar render, whereas, for example, it may well be acceptable in planning terms for people to put in PVC windows and have work carried out in cement render. So the two things are not the same. The standard that is set by this CARS scheme is particularly high. It's the gold standard of work to historic buildings. Part of the aim is that that in itself is used as an education tool to demonstrate what is best practice and what can be done. Sorry,
Yeah, so that's helpful, and it does. Question about so setting an upper limit for applications. So while there was an upper limit of 20k, I think, before, and we would have funded up to 12k, effectively that would now go up to, we'd fund 18k of a 20k project, which is quite a jump. So I don't know why it's gone from 60 to 90, but I'm quite happy to accept it if there's a good reason, and why there isn't an upper limit on applications going forward, as Councillor McComb and Councillor Hagman also drew attention to.
With any scheme of work to the building, to buildings that are coming forward, there are certain works which are ineligible for funding. So, for example, stripping paint, repainting, repairs to cement render. It may be an acceptable scheme in terms of Historic Environment Scotland being prepared to support components of it, to have aspects that are eligible for grant support and aspects which are ineligible. So what we would be looking to do is support the eligible parts of a scheme at a 90% rate, but have parts of it inevitably which fall outside the scope of the scheme and which are therefore ineligible. So you wouldn't necessarily have a project which was being funded in its entirety at 90%. You would have an eligible component funded at that rate and an ineligible component.
Okay, Ivor?
Chair, just for my own information, because I'm not too sure where the exact CARS area is, But would the George Hotel fit into this, and could we claim the 90%?
Which of you would like to take that one?
The George Hotel is within the conservation area, and that's one of the reasons why we originally developed the project at the George Hotel, because it is an important prime location. We secured, as you may be aware, grant funding through a different source, which was the Regeneration Capital Grant Fund through Scottish Government. So going forward, we'll be looking at other similar large-scale grant supports, bearing in mind there is only £230,000 in the total kitty for giving out conservation area grants within Stranraer. I think the George Hotel would probably swallow that and an awful lot more besides.
Okay, members will move to the recommendations. 2.1, we're asked to note the progress of the implementation of the Stranraer car scheme as detailed in paragraphs 3.2 to 3.4. Are we content to note that? At 2.2, we're asked to agree the amendment to the terms for allocation of property grants as set out in paragraphs 3.5 to 3.8. Are we content to agree that? Now, 2.3, agree in principle amendment to the spend profile for the car scheme as detailed at paragraphs 3.9 to 3.15, subject to a further report seeking approval for the increased capital funding required from the non-schools capital programme. Are we content to agree that in principle?
Yeah, it's on the restrictions, and Steve did mention that he's going to speak to Historic Scotland. I think we do need a feedback to see if those, and maybe built into 2.3, that we seek the report on these restrictions and having them amended in some way.
We'll take that as an operational action. Thank you both. Item 10, Reshaping Stranraer and the West Programme Progress Report, report by Head of Economy and Development. Members are presented with proposals for the approach to stakeholder engagement arrangements that will support delivery of the Reshaping Stranraer and the West Programme, as well as details of the findings of initial work in this area. Members are also presented with initial proposed investment objectives for the development of a detailed business case for the former George Hotel in Stranraer, and are advised of best practice process to develop a full business case and key steps and decision points for this committee. Simon Fieldhouse and Melissa McGarry are here to take questions. Is there anything that you would like to add to the report at this point?
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarity. There's a typo in 2.5 in the recommendation, which is to note the activities and timeline. That should just be to note the activities for the preparation of the strategic outline case.
Thank you for that, Simon. We'll move straight to members' questions and comments. Willie?
Yeah, Chair, and it doesn't feel that we're making any progress on this one with the Stranraer and the West Programme progress report. I'm looking at this in terms, and we do, as the Socialist Group, have a meeting arranged with Lorna and Stephen this, so I'll no rehearse many of the issues that I'll raise with Lorna and Steve on this. But what I'm looking at here is the case for change in respect of the George Hotel. My understanding going back was that we already had a project in place when we secured the funding to purchase the George Hotel. There was a project with an end use in mind, and therefore that has changed somewhat now that we don't have an end use in mind, and we're going through all this whole process. But then when we look at the timeline, the only indication I get from the timeline is a reference to 12 months, for the consultation on the George Hotel. That would be far, far too long for the George Hotel to sit in its current state. I think we need to be accelerating the whole process in terms of the George Hotel, putting back its roof, and then getting an end use alongside what's suggested in terms of the consultation. But in the consultation after that must be the 4 local members to be driving this forward with a much quicker and end use for the George Hotel. It's coming more and more to the school of thought in Stranraer that really we've purchased what is could be just a white elephant, and really what it's needed is just to demolish, even against the listed building status, because it doesn't look as if we have any use for it, and the cost of it would be extensive, and yet we don't have the money. We have to go back to the Scottish Government to get more grant to do the work. As I say, it doesn't look like progress, and the idea that it's going to lie for this 12-month, I think it said in the paper, in the local paper last night, it could be 2 years before we even move forward on it. And that's just totally unacceptable for at least I as a local member and the people of Stranraer.
Okay, on the factual matters in that, if any of you want to take those up?
The end use for the building that was stated in the application referred to mixed use, but it wasn't clear what those mixed uses actually were going to be. So when we referred back to the files, there didn't appear to be much clarity on what the specifics were in relation to the end use. The approach that we're now taking is to do the appropriate research and stakeholder engagement to identify an end use that aligns itself with our ambitions for the economic development of Stranraer. We want to ensure that the proposals that we bring forward are evidence-based, and so we're engaging in a process of research. In terms of putting the roof back on, the design of the roof the end use of the building will have implications for the design of the roof. So until we're clear what the end use of the building is going to be, we cannot commission work to design, specify and procure the roof reinstatement. We do obviously recognise that the condition of the building is acting as a serious disincentive to attract an investment to the town centre, as well as causing quite a considerable amount of public annoyance. We're committed to working as rapidly as we possibly can, but if we want to do this correctly and ensure that we invest in this property in such a way as that we generate the kind of economic benefits that we're ambitious to achieve, then we need to go through the process, ensuring that there's proper member engagement, ensuring that there's proper stakeholder engagement and public consultation as part of that process.
Thank you for that, Melissa. I'm bound to say that we are rather left at the mercy of whatever was in the minds of the members who thought this was a good idea at the time. There are not necessarily all that many of them left, but clearly there must have been some sort of notion that they had at that point. However, the trouble is that it is not particularly clear now. I think it is important we get this right and we do something which will be delivered that will benefit Stranraer, which will come in on budget, actually, which is why the 5-case approach is important, rather than returning overspends, which we could well do without. I do recognise members' frustrations and the wish that we make progress, but we've been gifted something which I can only assume seemed like a good idea at the time, but was not an issue I was involved with. So the reasons and justification for it remain unclear. Perhaps Councillor Scobie will understand them better than I. However, Katie, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. This item is increasingly frustrating for myself. I was really fortunate to be elected in May 2017, and I sat as the still sit as the Vice Chair of Wigton Area Committee. And possibly even our first meeting, I think it was Jason Sayers came and gave us what was happening in Stranraer, and there was a lot of frustration by members at the time. Now, I wasn't fully aware of all the past history, but I was new into the job, and I thought, we've got a new team coming on, let's see what happens. We subsequently got another new team, and we're now on another new team. So this is now the third team, and this is increasingly frustrating. I note that we've taken out the timeline of the recommendations for today. However, a timeline was sent to me and all the ward members in April 2019 for the George, with a clear strategy of what we were doing and why we were doing it. Why are we not doing that? Because as far as I can see, the work was actually, it was put in place. A timeline was shared with all the elected members, and at this point, in February 2020, we should be at building warrant stages, according to that timeline. Now, I appreciate there's a change of team yet again, but it becomes increasingly difficult as we as elected members, who the public put their good faith in electing us into delivering these strategies, when time and time again we're getting told, oh, actually, now there's been a change of team, or now this has happened. I'm just at a loss as to how I then go back to my constituents and say with good faith that actually now we've got it right this time, because actually the evidence suggests otherwise. And I'm increasingly frustrated as to how we get this forward. And okay, we don't have a timeline today, but when will we get a timeline for this? Because it's not, in my view, good enough that we just keep saying, oh, well, there's been a change of team, or there's been a restructure. I'm also aware that Councillor Surtees, who doesn't sit on this committee, was pulling up the point that we should be developing the whole area together, and it was agreed at full council that we'd be looking at the whole area, not just single projects on their own. So I guess I don't really particularly have a specific question, but it's airing my frustrations. And I guess the question is actually, when will we get a timeline as to how we move this forward?
Okay, Melissa.
Thank you. The overall timeline for the project is going to be influenced by the end use, the technical complexity of delivering that end use, the funding options that are available to us, the opportunities and timeline for securing external funding. The starting point is to go through this process to identify what the end use is. The timeline for doing that is coming back in June of 2020. At that stage, we would also wish to bring you a timeline of the next stage being to develop the outline business case that supports the preferred option that we're bringing to you in June. So the outline business, when we come to you in June, we will not only have the preferred way forward, but we will then have an estimate of the timeline for developing the outline business case. And the outline business case will comprise things like the initial design solution for the end use, the funding proposals and the timelines for securing that, the proposed procurement methodology and the timeline associated for doing that. So I can give you the timeline stage by stage, but in terms of the overall project, I can give you my best guess, but it really will come down to the actual end use and what the proposed end use of the building is. And that we don't yet know.
Okay. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to just echo Wally's sentiments and Katie's sentiments. We're all very frustrated with this. Last year, I made a call to demolish it. I probably still hold that view, but one of my questions are, now that we're looking at this consultation and what we're looking at probably the guts of another 2 years or so before we see any digging going on, are we at this point engaging with Environment Scotland to talk about delisting this thing, so that by the time we actually get an end use, we can then say, right, we've got this end use, we can keep the foundation, we can keep what we've got if we want, but if the end use that we've seen, that we found doesn't go with that, we can take it down. I'm just thinking, because if we get to that point where we're seeing an end use, we've got that end use, and it's saying that we don't need these 4 walls, which is literally all we have left, then we have to start another 2-year period before we can even start putting the diggers in. So can we look at that now so that we're ahead of the game?
Melissa?
Well, our remit as economic development is to look for economic uses out of the site. Part of that process, as I've already explained, is to identify end-use options. What we'll also be looking at as part of that process is the implementation options for delivering that end use. So whatever it is we decide to do on that site, will it be partial reinstatement of the building, full reinstatement of the building, clearance of the site and new build. At that point, when we explore those options, we need to have those discussions with Historic Environment Scotland in terms of delisting. So we will get to that stage as part of this options appraisal. If we were just to remove the building and clear the site, that may be a conclusion that we come to, but then it stops being an economic development project and it becomes an asset management project, because we're not going to get any economic outcomes of just creating a vacant cleared site. So that, while that option's not been ruled out, we will get to that, this next stage of the process that we're going to go through, looking at end use, how far the building can be used or not used, and then the kind of processes that we need to go through, engaging with some of the statutory agencies around how we would go about delivering that. That's this next piece of work.
Okay. Jim McComb.
Thanks, Chair. It is indeed extremely frustrating the way this is going. 3.6, I think, talks about developing a shared vision. Well, I'm not convinced there is any sign of a shared vision here with regard to the George Hotel. There's mention also of 3.8, a community advisory reference group. Now, how is that group going to articulate with the SMART group? How is it going to be involved in consultations? And we've just been told that the end use should be agreed by June of this year. Now, that is a fairly tight time scale, but that is a piece of work which should have been ongoing some time ago. So, where does it articulate with the SMART group, the community reference group? How long is it going to take to set it up, to carry out the consultations? The whole thing seems to be drifting.
Melissa?
The SMART group, as the report explains, and I think some previous reports have brought forward details, was initiated last year, and within the context of looking at consultation for the whole of Stranraer, not simply this project. And while there have been one or two bumps in the road, we understand now that the SMART group is quite enthusiastic about potentially acting as the advisory group to make sure that when we're doing community consultation in Stranraer and stakeholder engagement, that we are, being as inclusive as we can and talking to the right people. So that part of the report deals with that. The shared vision for Stranraer, there already is a vision, I think, that was articulated in 2006 for Stranraer, that it be a marine leisure destination. What we're planning on doing is working much more closely with the community to refresh that and ensure that that is firmly, that is still actually the vision of the local community, or whether there needs to be a bit more detail put on that so that that informs the work that we take forward. So it's about ensuring that in Stranraer, we're basically all singing with one voice, because we feel that that kind of joined up approach is a key part of the strategy to attract investment into Stranraer, that everybody's working together.
Okay. Jim, you want to come back?
Very briefly, Chair. The community reference group, what part does it play?
Okay, Leslie?
I think that's a very good question. We've actually in Appendix 3 put out some terms of reference about what the role of that group should be for you to consider. And the role is primarily as an advisory group. It's very much about, we'll be bringing a consultant in to deliver this commission, and it's very much about a consultant, whoever that consultant is, being advised and have reference to local knowledge and what's happening in the area. So it's also about working with people who are already proactively trying to do things in Stranraer Town Centre, so that, and they're looking to, my understanding is that they're looking to work jointly together for the benefit of Stranraer. So the role of that group would be very much about championing the process and engaging people through the process.
Okay. Archie, you want to come on just
Yeah,
that last
Chair,
specific point?
just a bit of clarity on Appendix 3 on the draft terms of reference for Community Advisory Reference Group. And it's the second paragraph under purpose. The group is not a lobbying group, nor does it make decisions per se. I mean, what I make quite clear here that we are the decision-making body in this committee here. So I would take per se right out of that description. They are acts as a source of impartial advice for decision makers and things like that. But we are the decision makers. There's no decisions made by any community group because we have to make that decision to spend.
Okay, duly noted. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. Stranraer certainly seems to be a bit of a headache, isn't it? We've been working on this for quite a few years in actual fact, and it just rumbles on and rumbles on. It's almost like the black hole where you throw lots of money and nothing really seems to appear. What I'm really concerned about is the fact that we're not progressing this in any shape or form, not just the George Hotel, but everything that's happening round about Stranraer. And I really feel the frustration of the local members from Stranraer. We have to try and find a way forward far quicker than we're doing at present. And my question is, do we actually have officer capacity to bring this forward at a real good positive rate?
Steve Rogers leaping to his feet.
Chair, thank you. I appreciate and sense some of the frustrations that are being expressed, and I can assure members that we will reflect on and take on board the comments, particularly around timescales and pace, because I think we all certainly share that concern that there is a need to move things on. What I would say in terms of the George Hotel is that the phase one that we inherited and ended up with having to deal with last year did suck in quite a considerable resource input to safely and securely deliver the kind of making safe of that building, which has resulted in the situation that we now have. We do not have a project yet for phase two. I think that's the reality of the position that we're in. We do not yet have a project for phase two, and what we've been trying to do in the report and in the responses is to outline to you the process that we now need to go through to develop the phase two project. Now, I do appreciate the desire for pace. I would also remind members that we have, over the last 12 months, introduced much more robust and rigorous business case development processes for major capital projects within the Council as a result of some of the recommendations from Professor Cole. So it's absolutely right that we do take a bit of time and develop a robust and sustainable approach to developing business cases for major capital projects. However, we will review the process that we're undertaking and reflect on where there are opportunities to up the pace to bring forward those solutions that members are looking for.
Andrew, you want to come back?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, because my question's still not been answered. Do we have the capacity within this council to deliver these schemes on a timely sort of basis, rather than letting it drag on and drag on?
Steve?
We've certainly addressed capacity issues within the team, and we are now moving a number of different projects forward. Where there are specific large-scale capital projects to be delivered, for example, the marina project, then we are bringing in additional external resource to project manage schemes like that to help us move forward, because we do have to work with a fairly limited core team, but we can supplement that, and that's what we're doing.
So am I picking up there that we're working with outside external consultants, etc., to bring forward these projects? Can I ask then, what is the cost involved?
I don't have the detail of that to hand, but certainly that's a fairly standard approach to supporting project management and delivery of capital programme projects, and the cost of those are allocated and recharged to those capital schemes.
Andrew, and then we are moving on.
Thanks, Chair. It's just that if there are extra costs, the longer these projects go on, obviously the larger the cost, unless you've got it on a fixed rate.
I don't know that you're able to to add anything more to that at this point, Steve.
I don't think there's anything further to add, Chair, but certainly we can reflect when we do the capital programme monitoring report next time round. We can provide some detail on the costs.
Absolutely. Okay, that would be helpful. David Ingalls, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I must admit I get frustrated with this as well, but we stepped in as a council and took the decision to buy the George Hotel. This paper is it's reshaping Stranraer and the West. Now, we attended a meeting, elected members, on the 10th of January, which I felt was very positive, and I'd like to thank Simon and his team for what they did that day. And it looks as though what came out of that meeting has influenced a lot of what's in the paper about the George Hotel today. So I think that meeting was very important, and I think you've taken on board what we had to say that day, and I'd be right in saying it probably changed your mind on a lot of things regarding this. So that's a positive step forward. I'd like to congratulate you on that. But the decisions that day, or the discussions, focused on whatever happened to the George Hotel or in Stranraer benefited the economy of the wider area in the West. And I think that was an important thing on that day. We discussed various things for the George Hotel, and hopefully from that discussion, then we can move forward fairly quickly with our ideas on that day. So I think we're being a wee bit negative. There's money being spent in Stranraer here, and the council officers have a fair task in their hands to get this delivered. Yes, it's taken a wee bit of time, and it would be nice to see it, coming forward a wee bit quicker. But you're right, we need to get it right. And we need to get it right not just for Stranraer, we need to get it right for Stranraer Town Centre and the wider economy in the West. So I appreciate your paper.
Thank you, David. And I do very much take the point that this has to work for Stranraer, but it also has to work for the wider region around Stranraer as well. Ronnie Nicholson, you're next.
No, I'll withdraw my question now. I won't prolong it anymore.
Thank you, Ronnie. Ian?
I'll not prolong it to any great degree, but I think David's probably summarised what I was feeling and thinking, still am actually. I feel as if these people have been lined up against the wall. The guns are sitting loaded, pointing at them, I really do. I think we're at a place, we've got a map or a plan in place, and actually it will go forward, kind of clear cognizance. I think we have to recognise that there's been a lot of hard work, there's certainly a lot of frustration, but as an Arndale South member, I'd be jumping up and down doing somersaults if this level of recognition was being placed on Annan. I really would be. So I think there's a clear plan, it's in place, the money's forthcoming, we've made a commitment and it should be recognised, and get the support should actually be going in behind officers. And that should really become for the administration, not for the opposition.
Okay, Henry?
Yeah, it's on a similar theme about getting it right that Councillor Ingalls mentioned there. We're carrying out this exercise in George Hotel where in June there'll be funding proposals, procurement, etc. end use. I'm just wondering if we do have the mechanisms in place to ensure that the outputs from the full consultation and community engagement that's due to finish in September, we really need to ensure that these actually marry, because we could be jumping the gun in June and not seeing the big picture. And when you see the potential for investment with the whole marine side of things and the Borderlands picture, I know
that there's frustration with the local members, but it's absolutely crucial that we do this right, because I think in the short time that I've certainly been an elected member, we seem to reflect a lot on where we've got it wrong. So I really do think it maybe is time just to take stock and do it right, get the right strategy and structures in place, because if we don't get it right at this moment in time, we could well be in the situation that we have been with the Northwest Community Campus, DG1, etc., and let's not go back over that old ground. But what we've said time and time again is that there were failings then. This is an opportunity to get it right, and I take the frustration aside. The most important thing is getting it right, and delivering the right project in the right places for that area.
Thank you, Henry. Sean?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a number of reports with regards to this, and it's clear to me that it's really the council officers that are taking the brunt of actually this forward, whereas when you look at the ambition of reshaping Stranraer in the West, it's a much bigger job than that as well, and hopefully when South of Scotland Enterprise are fully in place, then they can assist as well. But it's my issue is, again, and I've mentioned it before, it's about the longer term strategic overview and the delivery. We've heard that there's an advisory group, there's a whole host of stakeholders, and you are in the development of the plans, but once the plans have been developed, again, we have to look at what is the most appropriate delivery vehicle. And for the scale of some of these projects and the funding that will be required, it's more than just the council that, they'll have to involve a number of partners and an appropriate regeneration vehicle. And, I'm surprised with Ian as well, because the same sort of focus, but different, is in Annan with regards to the Annan Master Plan and the Annan and DG12 area, where we have the Annan Solutions team working with a range, but it seems to be more involved, the stakeholders there. They have now formed part of that delivery as well. But, if we are serious about doing that in Stranraer and doing that in Annan and doing that in Dumfries, we have to, at some point, actually identify what is the most appropriate way of taking this forward.
Okay, thank you, Sean. I have a couple of second-time speakers. Katie, you're first.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me come back in again. I said previously how frustrating it was, and it is. I mean, and I appreciate that the work that the team are doing now, it's not the initial team that started off, but the fact that we go back to 2004, we're 16 years later, I think it's safe to say that this is possibly the longest project I've ever been involved in. We've mentioned a lot about end use, and I am aware that our previous Head of Economic Development back in October 18 was requesting officers at the time, not the team that's before me here, for the end use strategy. So we've been talking again, and so I just wanted to clarify that, to suddenly say that we now need an end use, we've actually been asking for an end use for 2 years as well. So I appreciate, and my frustration is not directed at individuals, but it's just a plea that can we please get at this going forward. And certainly in our final recommendation today is to agree that we have a report coming back on the 9th of June. Can we get that timeline? Because obviously the timeline's been taken out of the recommendations today. So can we add that into the report for June? Is that a reasonable request? I think it is. And also the costings, because actually there's no costings in this report at all. How much have we spent today? What is the budget? Where are we getting the funding from? Because again, there's lack of detail, similarly to the previous item. There's no details of the spend to date on there and how we've spent it and to whom. So that would be my request, Chair, if we could potentially add those into the recommendations.
Okay. Can we ensure that those are brought back for the
yes.
June 2020? We are in 2020, aren't we? The June report.
Yeah. Yes. The timeline for the outline business case will be included in the June report, so that'll be the next stage. The financial position will come in March, in the March meeting, because that will be part of the capital programme monitoring report that gives the breakdown of all the projects. And so we'll bring those figures before June. It'll be March that you'll get those figures.
That information is always included in the monitoring reports, Katie, but I appreciate it's in a different report and a different meeting, so they need to be presented and reiterated here.
Okay, David?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. If I can just touch briefly on the SMART group. I attended a meeting on Tuesday night of the SMART group. It was a very positive meeting. It's a fluid organisation at the minute. You know, they're not quite got their niche as to where they want to go. It would be interesting, Melissa, if you could get along there and do similar type of meeting that you had with elected members. But they're very positive, and they also want to reach out to other groups within the West, you know, in Wigtonshire in particular, and get them involved in discussions as to what can happen and what the benefits would be working together. So the SMART group, although at the present moment in time it's struggling to find its niche, you know, at that meeting on Tuesday night it became very clear that they're a group of people who are really keen to liaise with the council and the community and outside STRANRAER, other communities. So if you could support them and get back in touch. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, David, and I certainly look forward to meeting with them in due course myself. Willie, and then we will go to the recommendations.
Yeah, Chair, I did say I wouldn't be talking that much, that I'm not going to rehearse what I'll perhaps be raising with Lorna and Steve. But just on it, we were given 1.8 million, not from but from the Scottish Government for the two projects. One was the Harbour Master and the other one was the George Hotel. As has been said in the discussion, then there was no end use. There was a proposal and a project within the George, and it was for mixed use. So, you know, that has gone on and we got the money. My understanding again in terms of, and Katie has asked the question, how much have we spent? My understanding was that it was 1.8, 400,000 for the Harbour Master, which I think exceeded that price, and we were left with 1.4. My understanding again is that we've spent that money and we're going to have to go back to the Scottish Government, because short of going back to the Scottish Government, then it will be the Council to consider whether it wants to pick up the tab for the development of the George Hotel if we don't succeed in getting the money to finish the George Hotel, because the 1.4 was to finish the George Hotel. Then, so we have got a big issue with the funding, and I think the frustration, the SMART group was established almost a year ago in Archie's time, and it was clear the members would lead that. So we have had consultation groups, but nothing's coming, and dates have been set of June and everything else. We need this whole thing frustrated, because the frustration echoed in here is much louder through in Stranraer in terms of the time this is taking and the inconvenience that's caused by it.
Okay, certainly some of the figures have been reported previously to committee. I can't remember the details of them just at this precise moment, but they have been in previous reports. However, Melissa, you wanted to come back on some of the detail?
Yes, just to reiterate, we will bring back detailed figures in the March report. The original application was a notional split of 400,000 from the 1.8 would be a financial contribution towards the Clock Tower project, with 1.4 notional contribution towards the George Hotel project. There has obviously been some significant expenditure on the George Hotel to date. However, there is still a significant balance of that 1.4 million remaining, and I'll confirm that figure for you. In terms of the original funding application, it was done presumably at a time where the quality and quantity of information in these applications wasn't as rigorous as they currently are. So we have been, the financial breakdown in terms of what was going to be spent on what in terms of the application form is fairly sparse, it has to be said. So we've really had to try and make assumptions. What we're doing now by moving on to a business case process as we move forward with this is to make sure that we bring forward evidence when we're bringing reports to committee, and that we actually have the details around what the spend is for and what the spend is intended to realise.
Okay, thank you, members. We will move to the recommendations, but in doing so, I take on board, because I am occasionally advised by him, I take on board what Councillor Carruthers says about support for officers. The officers here are not responsible for the past history of the George Hotel. There may be some members here who did think that purchasing it was a good idea at the time. They may have had something in mind for its purpose at the time, but certainly whatever mixed use that was, not entirely clear. I think it's very important that we get this right. The timescales ought to be reviewed, but nevertheless we need to get it right, and we need to do that with STRANRAER rather than to it. I would hate to be in a situation where in a few years' time people in STRANRAER say to us, what on earth did you do that for, whatever it might be. I would much rather that the end use for the George Hotel is something that the community thinks will benefit it, and that we have a business case that supports it, which is rigorous and costed, and if we require to seek funding from elsewhere for that, that we have the business case that backs that up in a truly robust and defensible manner, so that we can bring in the money we need to make a proper job of the project. But with that, we'll move to the recommendations. 2.1, we're asked to consider the project brief for STRANRAER in the West, stakeholder engagement and consultation as set out in the appendix, in Appendix 1. I think we've considered it. At 2.2, are we content to agree the proposals for stakeholder engagement as set out in Appendix 2? At 2.3, are we content to agree that a community advisory or reference group be established as set out, and the terms of reference for that group as set out in Appendix 3?
Just a small amendment to
With the minor removement of per se. At 2.4, are we content to agree the proposed investment objectives for the business case for the former George Hotel and STRANRAER set out at Appendix 4, noting these will be developed in detail throughout the business case process? At 2.5, are we content to note the activities for the preparation of the strategic outline case for the former George Hotel, including associated stakeholder engagement? That's also set out in Appendix 4. And are we content to agree that work to complete the strategic outline case for investment in the former George Hotel should now take place, and to receive a report on that strategic outline case at the meeting of this committee on 9th June? With the addition that has been requested. Okay, thank you for that, members. Lunch is probably cold by now, so I think this is an appropriate moment. We will reconvene at 1:45. Thank you. Okay, members, that's 1:45. Welcome back. We will reconvene. Just to announce, it was remiss of me not to have done so at the beginning of the meeting, but following the conclusion of committee, there will be a visit and walk round of building standards. That was something that had been discussed at the previous meeting of E&R before Christmas. I think you would find it in diary scheduled for 2 o'clock. I think that is probably ambitious, but it will take place immediately committee is concluded. So without further ado, we'll move on to item 11, CHAPELCROSS Site Transformation Progress Update, report by Head of Economy and Development. The purpose of this report is to present members with an update on the CHAPELCROSS site transformation activities following approval at full council in September 2019. We are presented with a range of information on the planned activities, timeline and monitoring of progress, along with proposals for member engagement to underpin the ambitions we agreed in September. Steve Rogers and Mark Fulton are here to respond to any questions members may have on the report. Gentlemen, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Nothing to add at this stage, Chair, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move straight on to questions and comments. Archie?
Yeah, thanks very much here. I think it's important that sort of kick this off as being the CHAPELCROSS SSG Chair, as well as being the Vice Chair of the Economy and Resources Committee. I think everybody's well aware of the strategic importance of this project for our area within the Borderlands growth deal. And I think what we have in front of us is a report which gives us a way forward in making sure that we are informed and understanding of what actually happens within the CHAPELCROSS project and the associated other organisations within there. Regarding the reports to committee, however, I would suggest that we perhaps have one every an update report every 6 months, which would be timely with all the things that are going on. I would also like to sort of add in that within the context of the report, there is the steer to the legislation in which we have to keep our holdings to. But we can't forget, of course, that we do have a region aspirations with regard to climate emergency. And thankfully, on Monday we had a meeting with Paul, myself, and Dougie had a meeting with Mark on Monday with regard about the climate emergency and our understanding. It is important within that legislation, of course, that there is an understanding of both the Scottish legislation and our aspirations of the Dumfries and Galloway Council to make sure that we're net carbon neutral within that time frame as well. And I think Mark took that on board while we were there. So I think members are well aware that this is a very important strategic project going forward, and I think the report outlines very fairly how we can, as members, be involved in the decision-making process, but also being kept up to date with what's going on.
Thank you, Archie. Other members? Ivor?
Chair, we had a report there from STRANRAER, the conservation area of the reshaping. There seems to be a lot going on in economic development just now, and when you go to 2B, there's a couple of, in Appendix 2B, sorry, a couple of time scales that are being pushed back a wee bit. Have we sufficient staff in place to make sure we are delivering these programmes? Because to me, this is the most important thing we are doing in the council just now, is to make sure that Dumfries and Galloway is economically prosperous. Can we make sure that we have the staff in place to deliver all these programmes?
Steve?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you. It's a good point in terms of resourcing a big project like this, and that's one of the reasons that we brought Mark Fulton in to assist us in terms of managing that process and taking it forward. However, I think it is recognised as part of the action plan here that we do need to put in place fairly quickly a dedicated project manager for this, and I see that as being a resource that's probably shared between ourselves, really the strategic project partners, ourselves, NDA and Scottish Enterprise, that there needs to be a project manager that's driving this, accountable to the programme board.
Okay. On the same point, Sean?
Yeah, just on the same point, I think it's mentioned in 3.14, I think some of the local members were involved in the initial, after the success of CX Project 1, that there was a follow-on request which was submitted by a former officer that was working on the Beyond CHAPELCROSS project, and that's related to 3.14, which is there's 495,000 from the NDA, but that was to be match funded by Scottish Enterprise, 225,000, and that could be in-kind contributions in terms of resources and staff, and the council as well committed to 225,000 as well. So there should be a resource over and above that to facilitate this project.
Thank you, Sean. Dougie?
Thanks, Chair. No particular question, just a comment to make and echo the comments made by Archie in relation to the significance of the CHAPELCROSS project and linking that with our commitment to achieve carbon net zero by 2025. The particular elements that I think are important within our 12-point plan in relation to the economic development of Dumfries and Galloway through our commitment to tackling climate change and the opportunities that presents ties in extremely well with the CHAPELCROSS project. So, you know, it's certainly got my full support, and also, you know, it will be a great assistance to us in the target that we have for 2025 and for the Scottish Government target of being net zero greenhouse gases, not just CO2, by 2045. Thank you.
Thank you, Dougie. Ian?
Just a small question regards 3.25 to 3.27. It's contained within recommendations as well, Steve, but the engagement with elected members, I wonder if you could just describe how that will work with the 4 directly elected members in Arndale South as well as what's been outlined there, please.
Well,
thanks, Steve.
Yeah, Chair, through you, as it says, we're planning to bring formal reports back to committee, and in addition to that, to arrange workshops around specific issues or specific impending decisions. So certainly there would be open invitation to attend those. But the ward members require additional briefings, then we'll certainly provide those as well. And I think Mark has been speaking with most of the ward members to just bring them up to speed on things.
You want to come back?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important that I know it goes beyond Arndale South being the ward where CHAPELCROSS sits, and I suppose the Greater Lockerbie Ann in particular, so Arndale North and East and Estill. But I think I've just made that comment a number of times in the past, just reaffirming that there has to be an emphasis on the local members in that particular area, that they are kept included.
Okay, Mark, on that point.
Thank you. Just to explain, one of the reasons why that item is in there, some members will have attended the workshops back in September before we actually took the paper to the full council. It was quite clear from there that they welcomed the workshop conversation and said that they would like to do more of it, because the CHAPELCROSS, the transformation of the site's been effectively going on since 2004, but there's not been a great deal of formal reach out to the members. So that section's in there to emphasise that we've recognised that the past is the past, we need to draw a line, lessons and move on. And the invitation basically is to all members, and who turns up. Hopefully we get the right people there to have a very rich and constructive conversation. But outside of that, I sort of maintain a working dialogue with SSG and Henry and various other members. So if people want to talk to me, just talk to me, and I'll do my best to explain whatever needs to be explained.
Okay, and just taking on the point that Archie had made at 3.25 regarding annual report to the Economy and Resources Committee, I take it there would be no obstacle to that being 6 monthly here and annually to full council.
Yeah,
it is a very important project, so I think if that could be arranged, I think that would be beneficial to all members. Okay, I take it we're content with that. Katie?
Thank you, Chair. It was actually just to clarify the same point, because in 3.25 it states an annual report, but on the page over it does say that we would have workshops twice a year. So we would have a workshop twice a year plus a 6 monthly report. Is that correct?
That's what I would envisage. I think a great deal has actually been happening in the background, as we now see from this report, so I think there will be plenty to report, but Mark can perhaps expand.
Yeah, the reason it's in there is that we've got a key decision to make in September with regards to move on to the next stage. Obviously, this conversation that we're having now, and there'll be a need for 2 workshops. So that's why it's in there. That can flex up or down. I suggest it doesn't flex down at all, because you need to be cited on this. You rightly should be cited on this. And the reason why you've got such a rich appendix is so that you've got line of sight to what's going on. There's no expectation that you read it page by page, but it provides an opportunity for a conversation should you need to find out something.
Okay, Henry?
Thank you very much, Chair. And just to confirm, there's been plenty of dialogue, and I really do appreciate that, Mark. I'd like just to give a point of clarity first. Through the CHAPELCROSS Site Stakeholders Group, we are becoming quite aware that there's going to be a condition placed on the site to declare its end state. Now, the nuclear industry is regulated quite differently from normal industry, where if you have a permit to operate any type of factory facility under the pollution prevention regulations, you have to, in that permit, within a period of time, identify what your end state condition will be and how you'll turn that back to brownfield. Currently, the CHAPELCROSS site, like the others, don't have that end state criteria identified. So there's a likelihood by around about 2025 that they will need to present their end state. Now, in the discussions that are ongoing with the NDA, they're actually looking at different options for the decommissioning. Now, throughout a report, we see a number in here, a year 2095, that looks at the potential when the 200 hectare site could be available for full use. Now, there's real potential when they look at this end state more rigorously that the significant majority of the site will become available much earlier than 2095. So with that kind of information, my first question would be, can we ensure that we've got the flexibility built in to get that stages of development incorporated into our plan? But more importantly, the focus on the existing brownfield area of the site is to ensure that we don't lose sight of the fact that it's there now, it's ready now, and in reference to day one, when do we anticipate day one?
Mark?
Thank you, Councillor McClelland. In terms of flexibility, we're actually working with NDA for them to put together a land options agreement such that land can be brought forward quickly. You'll be aware that within the 4 objectives that we've got, it includes 100% utilisation of the site throughout the period of borderlands. And in terms of when do we anticipate day one, I think day one is basically when the borderlands agreement is signed. And part of our preparation is to make sure that we make best use of the 10 to 15 year window that's been presented to us. So in the short term, that's until the 15th of May, we're basically preparing the SOBC for it to go into the Scottish Government, UK Government Borderlands black box of governance before it actually gets approved or not approved. After the 15th, we'll be doing an awful lot of work to make sure that on day one, when it's signed, when we bring the go, no-go decision to you in September, that it's on the basis of that we progress it as quickly as we possibly can, having taken into account the constraints that we've got. So you will be aware that there are a number of there's at least one opportunity being progressed through NDA with regard to the solar farm. I mean, there are other things as well that we're talking through, and we're hoping to include those within the SOBC such that we can actually get the earliest possible start after the September decision.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it was actually Councillor Marshall had highlighted it in 3.14 to do with the legacy 495k that the NDA had approved for the Beyond CHAPELCROSS Phase 2. So it was really just to get a little bit of clarity about that, because there was, there is sort of understandings between the different partners, I guess. What that figure signifies and what the other partners are sort of putting up, if you like, whether it be in kind or in money, because it does talk about the alignment activity to establish a process to request additional funding as the programme progresses. So it would be helpful and transparent, I think, to understand maybe what the figures are for that, what that looks like, and what the sort of delivery pace of that might be. So I'm just wondering, is there any information you have just now about what the other partners are putting up in kind or otherwise, given the changing landscapes in the last few years?
Beyond the aspiration that's put forward in the original grant letter, no. I can't tell you what the situation is with regard to the £225,000. It's not something I've followed up. But we do have active dialogue with Scottish Enterprise, and Scottish Enterprise are very active in the current phase of preparing the SOBC. So if they were to keep timesheets and log their time against what they've done, I'm sure they could tell us what they've given us in kind. But in terms of an example of what they're giving us in funding, we're running a number of external workshops to help support, develop the vision with the market. One's in London, one is in Glasgow, and they will be happening in February. The London one we're doing in a property which basically is one of Scottish Enterprise's buildings, let's say, Scotland House, which is on Victoria Embankment. and they're doing that as part of what they're providing to us. So the cost of all of that, which will be not a massive amount of money, but it's another cost, is part of their goodwill, if you like.
Okay, Stephen, you want to come back?
Yeah, because I mean, does the council also have a figure that it has as well as part of this kind of agreement?
I think when I spoke with the chief executive about this in September, he said it would be dealt with as part of the budgeting process.
Okay. Sean?
Yeah, just with regards to the stakeholder engagement plan, I think it's good that the wider council are involved in that. I think probably the Andale and Estill members have kind of been in a privileged position since the formation of the ND in 2005, because the SSG was set up, so all SSG members include it was 12, but it's now 11 Andale and Estill councillors. And the good thing is that previous projects that have been funded by the ND and the CX Project 1 and indeed CX Project 2 now, the likes of Mark comes along at least 3 times a year to the SSG meetings to inform the Andale and Estill members as well. So that, it doesn't say it within there, but that is an additional kind of briefing that's included in that. I think as someone who's kind of obviously involved in CHAPELCROSS, it's a very ambitious project, it's welcomed, there's lots of opportunities with the connection to the grid, etc. There is and I have mentioned it, there is a requirement to look at the infrastructure, not just the B722, but the other kind of roads and the classified roads to improve them. But there will be a number of challenges. I think one of the challenges is that it is still a licensed nuclear site. It's not like you're marketing something that is easily accessible. You still have to abide by the security conditions and the nuclear security conditions of that site. And I know in 3.10 it's kind of essential. It says that CX programme has an embedded presence on the site. I think that would be desirable, and that's kind of at the behest of the NDA. But you know, there has to be a presence on the site. But how that is managed, wait to see. But yeah, there is opportunities there, and again, I think Ian was talking about STRANRAER and the amount of money was going into there. But this is potentially at least 15 million initially that's going in to develop this site that will improve the Annan area and further, and hopefully the whole of Andale and Estill and Dumfries and Galloway. And to Dougie as well, just to remind him as well, and maybe to feed that back to Scottish Government, that nuclear is carbon free. So, you know, a small modular reactor, I wouldn't put that out of the question up at CHAPELCROSS.
Okay, I think I was about to move to recommendations, but Henry, you want to come back in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, for letting me back in. It's on the point 314 again, 3.14. The drawdown of this 495,000 grant money, we received the initial payment year 1. That was just part of the arrangement without any requirements of application from ourselves. But we're now heading into year 3. We haven't drawn down in year 2. We're heading into year 3, and again, I would wonder if it's possible to get a bit more clarity in future papers as to what's been drawn down and what our intentions are to draw down going forward. Because this isn't clear. This doesn't tell us anything. Or, sorry, it doesn't tell us very much.
Okay. Thank you. We basically put a paper to the relevant NDA panel on the 7th of January, and we were hoping to get a clean decision. We didn't get a clean decision, so we didn't put into the paper the money that had been approved. But the money that's been requested is about £170,000. And that's a good news story, because the condition of the grant is that it's an amount of money per year, and if it's not used in the year, it's lost. But through constructive discussion with the NDA, they've recognised that we've all recognised that there is a need to align the grant conditions with the new way that we're progressing CHAPELCROSS. And over the next month or two, we'll hopefully get that in writing to make it clear. But so far, the first payment has been made. The reason the second payment wasn't applied for, I guess, is because internally Dumfries and Galloway had resourcing issues. Basically, the person that's looking after it left the building, and they've actually been very understanding and helpful with regard to allowing us to pitch. It's you might recall from the SOBC that went in front of Scottish and UK government in May, that the Borderlands response was that they were going to encourage the programme to apply for future additional funding directly to the NDA. I think that point was referenced within the meeting with the main board on the CHAPELCROSS site, if I remember that right. And it's for us, when we get our programme board set up, to formally take that forward so that we've got clarity as to what our proposal is and then move forward. But we don't have that process in place yet.
Okay. With that, members, we'll go to the recommendations. I appreciate the update on a really important strategic project for this authority. So at 2.1, we're asked to note the progress that has been made by the CX partners in mobilisation of a new CX programme, that's at section 3, including drafting of a management and control framework for the programme, that's at appendix 5. We're content to note that. At 2.2, note the progress that has been made in aligning the NDA grant payments and grant conditions with the new CX programme mandate as set out in paragraph 3.14. We will note that. I do recognise there's been some requests for further information, but we can, I think, address that in future reporting. At 2.3, note the progress in securing internationally recognised experts and influencers to present and contribute at the CX Green Energy Economic Growth Workshop set out in paragraph 317 and 318. Content to note that. At 2.4, note the draft CX programme milestone and activity plan baselines contained in paragraphs 322 and appendix 5. At 2.5, agree the programme of elected member focus activities to support members to contribute and effectively influence the success of the CX programme, as set out in paragraphs 325 to 327. Also taken on board the request that we have 6 monthly reports to this committee rather than annually. I'm content to agree that. At 2.6, note the assessment of risks, assumptions, issues and dependencies log and the CX programme delivery confidence observations set out in paras 328 to 331 and appendix 3. And finally, note the forward view of programme activities in paragraphs 3.36 to 3.37. Grant. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Item 12 is Borderlands Economic Forum Recruitment Process, report by Director of Economy and Resources. This report provides members with information on the recruitment process for the selection of members of the Borderlands Economic Forum and provides more detailed information on the structure of the forum within the agreed Borderlands governance arrangements, and also feedback from both UK and Scottish governments on this. As part of the formal governance structure of the Borderlands deal, the Partnership Board agreed to establish an economic forum to enable the private sector to contribute to the further development and delivery of the deal. The Economic Forum will have 14 members, made up of 10 from the private sector, with 2 from each local authority area, and 4 additional places, with 2 reserved for local enterprise partnership representatives in England and 2 reserved for the South of Scotland, enterprise or another Scottish body. All members of the forum will have the same voting rights. And given that the chair of the forum will serve on the partnership board, only the 10 representatives appointed directly by the partner councils shall be eligible to be appointed as chair or vice chair of the forum. The 10 private sector places will be advertised on the Borderlands website and through additional publicity. Applicants will be separated by geography and passed to each of the councils to shortlist and arrange interviews. Donna Mounce is here to respond to any questions members may have on the report. Donna, is there anything you'd like to add to the report?
No, I think you've covered it in the main.
Okay, members, questions, comments? David?
Chair, I won't be able to attend the Buildings and Services tour, which is a shame because I would have enjoyed it, but I do have an engagement in Castle Douglas. Borderlands to date has not been an overwhelming success, and I've said that in the past, so I won't reiterate that today. I attended the seminar the other day, and I was able to have a better impression of the Chief Executive's involvement in the Borderlands project today and his feelings going forward. And whilst he is a very emollient person in the face of disaster, I don't think he's the right person for a job further on the Borderlands story. So I would like to propose an amendment to 2.4, and that would be to strike out the Chief Executive and put in Leader of Opposition, because I think that would strengthen the team and better reflect the Council as the Borderlands project goes forward.
We'll come to that when we consider the recommendations, I think, and we'll see whether you get a seconder. Any other questions or I beg your pardon, Katie, you'd already indicated. Carry on, please.
Thank you. I'm just looking at the selection process procedure, and I understand that, yes, we need to split it up geography-wise, or geographically-wise. How are we going to ensure that we get a broad skill base? Because I'm aware that some boards are appointed on a skill-based system, because it would be a pretty disastrous situation if we had two from each local authority area and they all had the same skill base and we were lacking. So how do we ensure that the board will have a broad range of skills as well as their locations?
Donna?
Yeah. Thank you. What we're doing at the moment is part of the process is writing a kind of job description, a person spec, a skills base for that, that each of the authorities would look for. And part of that will just be determined by who comes through and which areas we get. And what we'll look at as a collective is all the applications as they come through. So they'll be looked at as a whole by the partnership, while they're split into the geography. And it'll be a matter of just working through that and working through the kind of person spec that we've got to ensure that we've got a range of skills across.
Katie?
So, thank you, Chair, for letting me come back. So if we're looking at it as a whole, just for clarity, so, for example, would we be asked to look for somebody with specific skills? And the skills would be divvied up between the geographic areas. Is that what you mean? Because otherwise, how are we going to know what, say, Cumbria are looking at or the Scottish Borders are looking at?
I think what we'll be doing is we'll give you a flavour of what the applicants have come through. So if you've got a dozen applicants from across the piece, we'll give you a rundown of what skills are coming through in the other areas and what will be looked at. But there is a bit of chance in that there may be duplication because of how we do it. And there's unless we do it all as a collective, there's no way of ensuring that it is a risk. But we'll try and work that through when with the person spec that we've got and the selection process that we're putting in place. And we'll just have to try and manage that through so that you get an overview of the types of people and the types of skills that are coming through from the other areas. But I guess part of that selection process is about who are the right people to represent each of the areas, as well as their skills and what their interest is there too.
Okay. Any other member? Oh, Archie.
I know it's difficult looking to the side all the time when you're looking at the front and that, but I'm just coming back to something that may happen in shortly in the recommendations I see the way going forward. David hasn't got a seconder yet, but I would say the motion is to go with the recommendations as read, Chair.
Okay, well, I'm certainly happy to second that. I'm not sure that we can pronounce on the success or failure of Borderlands when it's barely implemented, but we shall go to the recommendations. Ronnie, I beg your pardon, please carry on.
Can I ask what Councillor James is to restate? What is
So I'd like to strike out from 2.4 the Chief Executive and insert the Leader of the Opposition.
You made a comment about the reason why.
Well, I mean, I've said at length before in previous meetings, I don't think the Borderlands process has been well conducted. The Chief Executive has been a kingpin in this as it goes on. I attended the seminar the other day and he didn't strike me as a person that had a great economic feel. He may have other qualities, but he didn't seem to be, to me, suitable and doesn't enjoy my confidence within the Borderlands or in these economic matters enough. And also I see that the opposition isn't actually represented in this panel, and I think it would be fairer if it was. I'm open to other suggestions of how to replace the chief executive, of course, if you think another director should go there, but I just don't think he's got enough on his plate as well. It's another factor.
Ian?
Anyways, thanks very much for the kind offer from and the motion put forward from David. It was news to me as much as it was to everybody else, I think. But I mean, I would accept additionality. I mean, maybe there is a point, maybe there's not. It's up to the council. I wouldn't like to think that the chief executive would be removed from the panel at all. I wouldn't support that, so I wouldn't second him. But if there's a feeling that the council wanted to see extra representation by virtue of the opposition, I'd be happy enough with that. But certainly I wouldn't support the motion as it's presented, because I do think Gavin as chief executive should be there.
Okay, Sean?
There's limited numbers, and we're asked to actually, there's two people from the council and one kind of political that have been that we've been asked to kind of select. I'm right in saying though that the Borderlands has got universal support across the council and the bid that we've made, so we're all singing from the same hymn sheet with regards to this, and you know, I'm quite happy with the recommendation, so if it's not been seconded, I would second.
Okay, so I think I'd second going with the recommendations, but we shall work through them one at a time, because clearly the debate is over 2.4. So in the first instance, can we note at 2.1 the process for recruiting and appointing the members of the Economic Forum as part of 3.3?
Chair, could we amend that to as per appendix? Because there's no 3.3 within the report, but there is a 3.3 within the appendix.
Always very grateful to you for your keen eye, Ivor. Indeed, we shall amend that so that we have it correct. Okay, so as amended, are we then content to move on to 2.2, note the structure of the Economic Forum as set out in paragraph 3.1.4. I'm now checking that feverishly to make sure it's there. Are we content to note that? 2.3, agree the interview process is set out in section 3.2 for the Dumfries and Galloway representatives. Okay, and at 2.4 we have a motion moved and seconded by Archie and myself. There has been an alternative proposal. Does that have a seconder? Okay, it does not. Content to...
Could we push the one with the additionality that we also include an extra member on the panel with regard to the leader of the official opposition, I think it's deemed.
Okay, so it appears we have a motion and an amendment.
What is the seconded amendment?
It would be that we go with the ones there plus the leader of the official opposition.
So is the original motion withdrawn in order for the mover of the first motion to...
The original motion did not have a seconder. Well, actually, if I'm to be very strictly accurate, the motion is with myself and Councillor Dryborough, since that attracted, or rather Councillor Dryborough and myself, since that attracted a seconder first. The amendment that may have come from David did not in fact attract a seconder, and we now have an amendment, I think, duly proposed and seconded. But I'm always happy to get governance advice, just in case I'm wrong.
Yeah, Chair, just governance advice and the terminology of the amendment, official opposition. I don't think I've seen that in standing orders. I don't know.
Matter for the mover and seconder, I think.
Chair, my understanding is that there is a senior councillor who is the leader of the opposition. That would be the official opposition, I would take it. So therefore, that is who I was proposing, or the senior councillor.
So you want a senior councillor, but there's more than one senior councillor.
We have a motion and amendment. We'll go to the vote.
Okay, I've got a motion proposed by the Vice Chair, seconded by the Chair, to move recommendation 2.4 as it's stated in the report. We have an amendment proposed by Councillor Hislop, seconded by Councillor James, for 2.4 with the addition of the leader of the opposition being the leader of the Conservative Party group. Right, going to the vote then, Chair.
Motion.
Vice Chair.
Motion.
Councillor Campbell.
Motion.
Councillor Carruthers.
Amendment.
Councillor Hagman.
Motion.
Councillor Hislop. Councillor James.
Amendment.
Councillor McClelland.
Motion.
Councillor McComb.
Motion.
Councillor Marshall.
Motion.
Councillor Martin.
Motion.
Councillor Murray.
Motion.
Councillor Nicholson.
Motion.
Councillor Thompson.
Motion.
Motion's carried 11 votes to 3.
Thank you. Then we'll move on to 2.5. Note that a report will be brought to a future meeting of this committee seeking approval of the nominees to be submitted to the Borderlands Partnership Board as detailed at paragraph 3.2.3. We intend to note that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Donna. Item 13 is North Channel Partnership Update, report by Director of Economy and Resources. This report updates elected members on the development of collaborative working on areas of mutual economic benefit with Mid and East Antrim Borough Council. We are provided with a summary of progress and a draft action plan which has been developed with Mid and East Antrim and which will form the basis of the work plan for the North Channel Partnership. Members were invited to attend a briefing with the Chief Executive of Mid and East Antrim on 22nd January, and I had the opportunity to start to discuss the breadth of shared opportunities, including lobbying, and these form the basis of the work set out in the draft plan. Andy Reid is here to respond to any questions members may have on the report. Andy, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Nothing to add at this moment.
Okay. Members, comments, questions? Archie.
Thanks very much, Chair. Obviously, we had the visit across to Mid and East Antrim last year, and then we've had the visit back from the Chief Exec from Mid and East Antrim and her support. I think this is a positive-looking opportunity for Dumfries and Galloway, specifically with the role of the ports within Cairnryan and Lamb, and looking at the report itself and the update, we can see some real potential there for that growth, and potentially another growth deal coming forward in the future. We've already had the A7775 lobby group to discuss with the Chief Exec of Mid and East Antrim, and she was pretty, I think the word is forward-looking to try and get them to understand the issue of the A75 and the 77 within Dumfries and Galloway. All in all, Chair, a good update, and you know the recommendations is to note, but I would say note and endorse would probably be a better way going forward.
Well, thank you very much, Archie. I'm certainly happy to second that. I also note with specific reference to the A75 and A77, the publication of the second sift of projects this week going forward to SDPR2, which includes both further assessment of rail line between Dumfries and Stranraer and also a substantial programme of upgrades for the A75, A77. That is not the same thing as capital allocations, but it is certainly very encouraging that these are maintaining their positions as the process starts to develop, but suggests that one of these very early areas of activities members will see outlined in the draft action plan may at long last be pushing at something of an open door. Doesn't mean that we stop pushing, but I think is at least encouraging. And it also suggests that we are starting to form this relationship and its work plan on the right basis and pointing in the right direction. Is there any other members' comments or questions? Dougie?
Thank you, Chair. You'll recall from last week when we met at the Kirkcudbright Galleries with the their colleagues from Mid and East Antrim that are raised the issue about the projects that develop from the action plan should be very much looked through the lens of our commitment to climate change. I'm just wondering how this will be reflected. Is this something that will build into the action plan in terms of making sure that our commitment is properly articulated in that regard?
Andy?
Yeah, taking forward the individual aspects within the action plan, there'll be sort of sheets which will develop how we deliver each individual action once our officers from Dumfries and Galloway liaise with Mid and East Antrim officers. Within that, we'll put some consideration of the environmental and climate impact.
Okay, thank you for that. Katie?
Thank you for that. I'm just looking through the collaborative events and sort of some of the proposed plans that we could potentially look at, and I do note it says they could include. One thing that's missing off there is anything to do with the creative industry. We've obviously got some key major creative events, from Wigton Book Festival to Spring Fling, and in fact the creative industry is worth more in Dumfries and Galloway than forestry, for example. So it's a key industry, and we're also looking at developing opportunities for sports for our young people, but equally music and arts for our young people. So it's just really a request that we could keep that in mind as we go and look to develop further.
Yep, Andy, I think that is a very sensible piece of feedback. It's one of the things that I did note when we were there, that actually that strikes me that there could be another strand of activity there that is worth us exploring further.
Yeah, absolutely. And having had the sort of the terms of reference side of the Kubrick Art Gallery, I mean, it's important that we include those. I'll make sure that that's referenced within there in the collaborative events as a whole, looking at linking our events and also Mid and East Antrim events.
Can I just put a plug also, Chair, if I may? We have also a Dumfries and Galloway Youth Orchestra, so if there's an orchestra in the north of Ireland, it would be fantastic if we could link them up as well.
Okay, I think this is what's really interesting actually about an opportunity such as this. The more it is considered, the more that the opportunities for doing things together actually start to become apparent. Members, if we're content with that, we will go to the recommendations, in which we're being asked to note progress and endorse the draft action plan as detailed in the appendix. Are we content to do that? Okay, thank you, Andy. Item 14 is the Head of Service 6-month assessment, 1st April to 30th September 2019, of Assessors and Electoral Registration Officer Service Business Plan 2019 to 2023 performance, and the report by the Assessor and Electoral Registration Officer. This report provides elected members with the Assessor's assessment. Who writes these things? With the Assessor's assessment of the 6-month progress for 2019-20 on delivery of the 2019 to 2023 business plan for the service. The report also includes more detailed information on the service risk register and health and safety performance. The report summarises the key achievements in the last 6 months at paragraph 3.8 and summarises the strong service performance at tables 1 and 2 of the report. The format of the report reflects members' requests for trend information and benchmarking data and also sources to be included, and this is also reflected in the appendix. Jim Doig is here to respond to any questions members may have on the report. Jim, is there anything you'd like to add at this point?
Nothing to add, Chair, thanks.
Okay, members, will go straight to questions in that case. Archie?
Yeah, Chair, it's really pleasing to note on page 302 about the average number of days lost per all other non-teacher local government employees. Obviously much easier to manage with a smaller team, considering when we go to future reports within this paper. So it's good to see that that's been well looked after.
Okay, yep, but I entirely agree with that. Ivor?
Chair, it's just for my own information. It's on page 310. It's percentage of RIDDER investigations completed within 3 weeks. And then its value is DIV/0. Or is that Roman numerals, the DIV for the number?
Can we clarify that?
Yeah, I think that's just the way it's reported. It is in fact 0. I think it's just the way it's pulled through on the report. Correct, yeah.
Okay. Sean?
Just a general comment, well done. Now I thought there was something the matter with the report because they're all green. But
Yeah, absolutely. A very straightforward one to scrutinise, I think. Henry?
Yeah, again, yeah, it's good to see the all green, but just for a bit of clarity, when you actually go into the risk matrices, there's a number of targets where the white dot is in the red. And if you're using a red, kind of amber green, it's certainly not normal, I would have thought, to have a target in the red, because red to me would be unacceptable. Could you maybe just clarify that, Jim, please?
Yeah, sure. I think where some the risks we've got, there are sort of short-term, sort of reasonably high risks, but as hopefully I've shown within there, we have got mitigation in place to counter those. So I'm quite confident that the work we're doing around to manage those risks is okay. But you're quite right. The sort of short-term risk is sort of the impact and likelihood are reasonably high if we don't actually manage them properly.
I suppose the point behind that being that there are some risks which will always remain high risk. It's the action you take to try and mitigate those or prevent them from occurring in the first place. But you can't reduce the nature of the risk itself. It will always be what it is.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, yeah, a lot of them are legislative risks, so and a lot of them are unknown at this stage, so we're working towards them. So I really think they need to be raised as a sort of high risk.
Okay, so Stephen?
Yeah, it was just the wee red symbol on page 303 to do with the percentage of amendments made to valuation roll. Value 61.7%, the target 70. It was just really to understand what that signifies.
Essentially, the red dot relates to 2018-19, where our KPIs were below target. As you can see in the left-hand column for current year, we're just sitting slightly above target. So we've put some measures in place to address that, and that's why we're sort of changed from red to green this year.
Okay, members, if there are no further questions, we'll move to the recommendations. We've been asked to review the 6-month summary of performance for the Assessor and ERO business plan for the period 1st April 2019 to 30th September 2019 as at the appendix. I think we're content we've done that. Okay, thanks very much. Thank you, Jim. Item 15 is a head of service 6-month assessment, 1st April to 30th September 2019 of the Economy and Development Business Plan 2019-2023 performance. And as per the last one, although in this case Steve Rogers is here to respond to any questions members may have on the report. Steve, is there anything you'd like to add?
Nothing to add at this stage, Chair, thanks.
Okay, in that case we'll move straight to questions and comments. Ivor?
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 points. Page 320, we have the young people not in education, training or employment supported into employment, training and education. The long-term trend of those are going down. Status is red for last year, and it's still going down this year. Is this because we've changed the way we deliver that service? I remember there was something whereby we're moving away from one and moving into another way of delivering that. Can you just maybe remind me on that? The next one was page 329, an old favourite, percent of staff who have completed an annual performance review. It's got a red indicator there. The target for the half year is 95%. The target for the full year is 95%, and the value is 65. Surely if it were 65 in half a year, we should be able to target the 100, or 35% is still left in the other half. I would have thought that would have been on course within half a year, but maybe I'm picking that one up wrong. And the other one, percentage of building warrants applications responded to within 20 days. That's on an improving scale. However, the percentage of completion certificates responded to within 10 working days is declining. Now, when you look at the exception report, it says dealt with within existing resources. Now, my reading of that is we've taken the staff out of the responding to the completion certificates and put them into the applications, so they've got better whilst the other ones got worse. Do we need more staff in there actually to make sure that we can deliver both of these services at the appropriate level?
Okay, Steve, can you assist with those?
Okay, thank you, Chair. In relation to the first query in connection with young people into or not in education, training or employment supported into a positive outcome, essentially. Yeah, the targets for this have been revised this year, and it does reflect changes to the way in which the programme is being delivered. It's a much more focused programme, and members may be aware that, and I think there's reference to it in the covering report, that this was, I think that our delivery of support to young people was recognised with an award from the Scottish Urban Regeneration Forum this year. Second point was in relation to PDRs, which is showing as a red, and I think that's because it's measured on a rolling 12-month programme. So you're quite right, between now and the end of the year, or between the end of September and the end of the year, we probably have the opportunity to pick the pace up in terms of the PDRs. There's been some disruption because of the changes that we've had to put in place to bring staff together from 5 or 6 different destinations. So there's been a little bit of changeover in line management and so on. But there is the opportunity to pick the pace up again in the remainder of the year. The building standards position, as members will be aware, we have previously reported the issues within building standards in terms of performance and capacity and so on. I think the reference to the resources is really around the action plan that we've put in place. However, that part of that action plan does include putting some additional staff resource into building standards through the creation of 2 or 3 new positions, and that is being addressed from within our current overall resource allocation. So it's probably technically correct to say there's no resource implication, but it doesn't mean that we're not putting additional staff across into building standards.
Okay, thank you for that, Steve. Henry?
Thanks again, Chair. Steve, page 325. And it's the delivery of the Borderlands growth deal. We've already had a couple of papers this afternoon, and I think in the paper 11 item, agenda 11, Mark alluded to the SOBCs going through the process and coming back in September, and at that point, day 1 would be as short a period as possible thereafter. So I would have thought by day 1 we would have had in our hands by then a Borderlands growth deal. This timeline suggesting the 31st of March 2023. I certainly hope from September 2020 that day 1 will be a lot sooner than the 31st of March 2023, and we've got 100% achievement. Is that an unfair reflection?
To bring with the overall Borderlands deal that we're talking, not just the CHAPELCROSS one that you're talking about, Henry. I think when you look at the STRANRAER side of things, the marina port and that, it's all included in the Borderlands deal, and making sure we have the energy company and that sort of do. But the CHAPELCROSS one, I'm totally with you on that one.
Thank you for that, Archie. Maybe nothing to add to that.
As the Vice Chair says, this indicator relates to the overall programme. So yes, we do expect there to be, subject to approval of the final deal late summer this year, then obviously project delivery activity will kick off right across the board on a whole range of projects and programmes, and no doubt that'll get reflected in how we report this in future. At the moment, this is really very much around the programme and the deal as a whole.
Henry?
Yeah, I was just reiterating the point of the expectations of day one, Chair, sorry.
I take the point. Katie?
Thank you. There's lots of information in here, as there always is in these reports, but I'm just slightly concerned. There's quite a lot of these have a due date of the 31st of March this year. And to pick out a few of them, there is the signing of a memorandum in terms of a tourist strategy, and it's sitting at 0. We've got the facilitation of the development of the Southwest 400 tourism route, and that's sitting at 15%, but yet it's due 31st of March. But the one particularly that I would want to pick up on is the one on page 325, which is the reviewing of the derelict property strategy, to put in place a strategy that will dovetail into the empty properties strategy. Now, I'm aware that my ward was the place that did the trial of an empty, or there was a empty home derelict building project done last year, and that is sitting there at 10% completed, but yet it's due by the end of March. So I was just wondering if there's any information, because there's not an exception report on that. Where are we with the empty property or the derelict building strategy? Because I know it's a subject that actually all of us as wards in our different wards get contacted about.
Yep, Steve.
Okay, Chair, thank you. On page 348 of Appendix 3, this is a list of the updates and changes to performance indicators and projects. So with that particular one, there is an update contained in the third column there, just explaining the change of end date to 31st of March 2021 to provide time to review and reprioritise activities in line with council priorities and the activities being delivered by the South of Scotland Enterprise Agency. So that's really us explaining that we're having to reprioritise that piece of work to reflect the other demands on that particular team at this point in time. And with the emergence of the new agency from the 1st of April, there's going to be another potential strategic partner there, so we want to be able to engage with them around some of this. So we've pushed the end date back to 31st of March 2021.
Okay. So members, we'll go to the
Sorry, can I just ask, was there a response in regard to the tourism, the Southwest Tourism Trail, of where we are with that? Because I'm just having a quick look and I can't see that on this on that list as well. Apologies, I hadn't seen that one because it wasn't marked as an exception report.
My understanding is that effectively the tourism trail is now the Southwest 300, and it's been taken forward by Visit Dumfries and Galloway.
So will we have that reflected in the next one? Just because it's still sitting there as an indicator of sitting as only 15% progress. So should that then be marked as that will come out for future plans?
Yeah,
Chair, if we can tidy up the indicator.
This is the 6-month report, so that was the position at the end of September. So I certainly know that the funding agreement has been concluded with Visit South West Scotland, and as part of that agreement, they are continuing to develop and promote the Southwest 300 route.
Okay, members, we'll go to the recommendations. So at 2.1, we are asked to review the 6-month summary, including the performance information on health and safety and management of risks within the Service Risks Register at Appendix 1. I think we've done that. At 2.2, scrutinise the exception reporting and consider whether the actions proposed are adequate to improve performance. Okay. At 2.3, agree the proposed amendments to the current business plan measures. That's at Appendix 3. Are we content with those two? Okay. Thanks, Steve. Okay, item 16 is the third in the set of business plan performance reporting, this being people and transformation. And Paul Clarkin joins us to respond to questions and comments. Paul, have you anything that you'd like to add to the report?
Nothing to add, Chair.
Okay, members, questions or comments? Looks like it's... Archie, beg your pardon. I must get better at looking to my, right.
It's only sort of 45 degrees looking right. And
The
can I
blind
say
spot.
I'm extremely pleased on the first one, and the number of participants in the graduate employment scheme, that we've actually hit our target on that particular thing. Although it's a small target, we'd like to see that improved in future years, but I think hitting the target in the graduate employment scheme is a really good thing to see. Nothing else to add, Chair.
Thanks for that, Archie. Any other questions or comments? Okay, in that case, we'll go straight to the recommendations. At 2.1, we've reviewed the 6-month summary, and at 2.2, are we content to agree the proposed amendments to the current business plan measures in Appendix 2? Thanks very much, Paul. Item 17 is the Workforce Strategy Update 2020 report by Head of People and Transformation. This report provides a final update on the Workforce Strategy 2015 to 2020 and sets out how the future activity on workforce planning and development is captured in the new council-wide workforce plan, which was considered and agreed at this committee in September 2019. I welcome the summary of progress this report provides and the reassurance that ongoing actions and work is captured through the new plan and also through the transformation work that is progressing in relation to workforce. Paul Clarkin and James McDowell are here to respond to any questions members have on the report. Gentlemen, have you got anything to add to the report?
Nothing to add, Chair.
Okay, we'll go straight to questions and comments. Henry?
The only point I had was it's regarding the gender pay gap, and I see we have managed to get a reduction down to 4.14%. I'm just wondering how realistic, or do we have a realistic target of getting actual equality, and when's that likely to be, Paul?
Chair, the achieving 4 is very good against the national target, which is much higher than that. We do have a number of actions that we're beginning to operate, but there will be a certain amount of disparity in that, given that we work on incremental scales, and there are always variances on that. So much so that it can vary as much as 1.5% to 2% on a 3-monthly basis. So we can see that level of fluctuation as people leave and other people start. So there'll always be a certain amount there. But we're constantly looking through our equalities agenda to see how we can even that up.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Members, any other questions? Sean?
Just on, I think it's on page 395. I'm just wondering if there's a kind of, when we get the performance reports across all the services, one area of concern that usually crops up is the lack of people that complete a PDR, personal development, or PDPs. And I'm just wondering, are we doing anything specific? Because this has been going on for a number of years. And is there anything that we can do to kind of get that number boosted so that we're actually hitting the targets across our services?
James?
Through yourself, Chair. Yeah, absolutely. We've taken it that we're refreshing. We're refreshing the PDR process and procedure, and we'll bring that back to this committee. What we're doing is we're building in, it's not a standalone annual tick box PDR that happens every year. You know, it's built into one-to-ones. It's something that happens on an ongoing basis throughout the year so that everyone is clear about what those objectives are, how they're meeting those objectives, you know, having that well-being element of it, you know, having that, you know, how are you doing today? You know, just having those conversations through that one-to-one and support meeting, as well as conducting the PDR as we go throughout that year. So it is very different. We're also looking at technology, so building into iTrent. So rather having that 37-page document that we currently have, it's about building it into iTrent, where the process will be slick within there, and it will be available to everybody. You know, so it's about making sure we can reach everybody, not just people who have a PC. There's still electronic forms that can be used and be filled in and attached onto the system, so everything will be more slicker and streamlined.
Archie?
Thanks very much, Chair. I'm just looking at page 380 at 3.8, improving employee engagement, and the second from last bullet point, the staff survey provided feedback and 94% of staff understood how they can contribute to achieving our council's priorities. Now, it's quite a high level of feedback, how we're going to improve that, for one thing. And secondly, coming back to what the issue that Henry mentioned about the gender pay gap and things like that, my understanding is there's national pay discussions going on to look at the structure, the pay structure within local authorities. And I'm just wondering if that would help support that side of things.
We're consolidating the living wage, so we'll actually be bringing that. We've already got that agreed. We'll bring that into effect on the 1st of April, and I would expect that there could be some changes in terms of the balance on the gender pay gap, because predominantly there'll be a larger number of females at bottom end of the scale who are within the bands 1 to 3, which are covered by the changes we're bringing in. So there should be some positive news on that. There you go. In terms of 94%, I think 94% is good, but we will try and improve it. 94 is pretty good in staff survey. To actually know that how they contribute to achieving it. I mean, to get that, I think anyone would take that in that kind of survey.
Absolutely. But improvement's always welcome.
No, as I said,
John, okay.
I don't need it now, because that was if you're asking on the gender pay gap, it's great to see it is coming down.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, members, we'll go to the recommendations. We've reviewed the progress made under the Workforce Strategy 2015-2020 as outlined in the appendix. And can we note the workforce plan position and that any work in progress or ongoing has been fully captured in the new council-wide workforce plan. Happy to note that? Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Item 18 is Dumfries and Galloway Council's response to the Scottish Government's consultation on the replacement of European structural funds in Scotland post-EU exit, report by Director of Economy and Resources. This report seeks members' agreement on a response to the Scottish Government's consultation on the replacement of European structural funds in Scotland post-EU exit. European funds have been important in supporting economic development projects and a wide range of activities in the south of Scotland. The report refers to the NUTS 2 area and the coordination of draft consultation responses with the other southern Scotland local authorities in order to establish a consistent and clear position which reflects the NUTS 2 region needs and the evidence need for funding. Andy Reid and Steve Rogers are here to respond to any questions members have on the report. Gentlemen, have you anything to add?
Nothing to add, thanks, Chair.
Questions or comments? Well, it's probably the single most important item, but we'll leave it to the end. I take it members are happy with the content of the proposed response, and also that I write to local elected members, that is to say MPs and MSPs across the south of Scotland as well. I think it's important that we enlist their support in this as well. Ronnie, are you indicating to? Yeah.
No, it's fine, but I think maybe the leader of the council as well yourself should sign that letter.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be sensible. Happy to amend it to that effect. Katie?
Thank you, Chair. I have to admit that I'm not an expert on this topic, but could I just get a really quick summary of what is NUTS? Could somebody just explain to me, just in a short way? I've not, as far as I'm aware, there's not been any member seminars on this, and it's something that I'm not aware that I've got a great deal of knowledge on. I understand that it's important, but just a quick summary, because it's, we've referred to it, and it's an abbreviation right through this report, but could I have a very quick summary if possible?
So, I think they're probably... These aren't working very well today. There are a range of responses to what is NUTS at the end of the day, I have to say. But perhaps, Steve, you can assist with that. It is outlined to some extent in the report, particularly paragraph 3.5 and 3.6.
Yeah, Chair, I was just going to refer to paragraphs 3.5 and 3.6. It's essentially the building block for European regional policy. So the NUTS regions are the statistical regions that are used to analyse kind of socio-economic data and trends, and are used to build up a picture right across the European Union, and they highlight disparities between different parts and different regions within the EU, and therefore have formed the basis on which the EU historically has allocated funding to try to help rebalance the overall EU economy. That's why they're important.
Yeah, and I think it's also important thereafter to emphasise that the redrawn boundaries are fundamental, because they demonstrate the extent to which we are lagging behind and therefore the need for the additional funding. It was an argument that took a bit of convincing back in the day. Members who were here at the time will remember it clearly, but it was very worthwhile. And it should be adhered to in whatever comes next, because if a shared prosperity fund is to mean anything, it's got to be shared out, I think. Jim, and then I think Ronnie wanted to come back in.
Thanks, Chair. 3.4. I'm slightly puzzled by the final sentence there. UK government has indicated that all funding previously agreed with the EU programmes will continue to receive funding. Does that mean that all the agreed funding will come through to the areas expecting to receive the funding?
I believe that to be the case. I think it's a typo.
Yeah, I mean, UK government have underwritten all programmes which have already been agreed funding up until the end of their termed period.
So all the previously agreed funding will come through. With your leave, Chair, just a second wee point. In the response, page 411, it states that Dumfries and Galloway and the Scottish borders were considered to be too sparsely populated to make up a NUTS 2 area in their own right. That, to my mind, is a bit unfortunate, considering the area covered by SOCEP. I would have thought logically, if SOCEP was covering D&G and the Scottish borders, that would be a suitable area for a NUTS 2 classification.
Andy?
It's going back to when we originally had it reclassified, and that was a decision by the Scottish Government and UK Government based upon the number of sort of the population and the area which covers to sort of balance out the whole of Scotland. As far as sort of the recognition as a NUTS 2 area, it wouldn't be recognised, and it was noted that that's the case.
Archie, you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, NUTS 2's area were long before the South of Scotland enterprise and the borderland advancing. We do have, as previous agreements from this committee, to look at a NUTS 2 area with the South of Scotland councils, including South Lanarkshire, the Ayrshires, Dumfries and Galloway borders, and the borders. So we are looking going forward that way, Jim, to whoever comes forward to be the NUTS 2 particular area for that. And that's been supported by South Lanarkshire Council administrating to that.
Okay. Ivor?
Chair, it was just to sort of reiterate the points you made. This was a lot of hard work back in the day. Officers of this council, along with officers from Borders Council, worked hard to lobby to get us into the position we were. We were disadvantaged previously because I think we were lumped in with Glasgow, which Glasgow's a nice place, but they were slightly higher GVA than what we had, and we lost out in funding compared to the Highlands. So it was based on the number of people you had in your area. European rules said it had to be of a certain size, and I think to actually move away or to deviate from this would be wrong. So I think this report reflects what we should be doing, and we should be moving this forward as quick as we can and make sure that we do get all the funding that we can from the UK government when they're in such a good mood after getting their way.
Thank you, Ivor. Ian?
I just thought, I mean, it is a confusing item, but I thought the very last page, page 414, describes it well. You've got the two maps, and the first map obviously outlines what it used to be, and we're more developed regions classes at that point, but we're redesignated geographically, and we're now in the map on the right hand side, we're a less developed region, which allows us to tap into monies that we previously couldn't tap into. That's how I can read it in very basic layman's terms, and that's where we should be, as Ivor's already outlined. And it's again recognising all the hard work and over both local authorities in particular and the officers present.
Thank you, Ian. Katie, and then we shall go to the recommendations.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me come back in again. Clearly, the item we're looking at is in the replacement of the European structural funds. But can I just ask officers, have you had any indication of whether there'll be any consultation on the replacement of the Erasmus funding that previously we, as a region, have received funding for in the past? As I say, it's a kind of side question to this, but it's just have you had any indication on that?
No, there's been no further consultation on the UK Shared Prosperity Fund and how that's going to replace previous European funding, as and when we'll forward that on to members.
Okay, members, we'll go to the recommendations. And I think it's fair to say that, with two former leaders of the council in the room, that this has been something that has been pursued by successive administrations. It's unfortunate that we ended up winning the case and what's happening having happened, but it may be useful to us in the future, and that's why this is important. So at 2.1, we have reviewed, are we content to agree the draft response to the Scottish Government consultation on replacement of European structural funds as detailed in appendices 1 and 2? And can we agree that the Chair of Economy Resources and the Leader write to local members of Parliament and members of Scottish Parliament? Just for clarity, I would take that to mean the South of Scotland electoral region, for the purposes of Scottish Parliament, to outline our position and request support as detailed at paragraph 3.17. Are we agreed? Excellent. Thank you very much, members. I have no urgent business. Thank you for your attendance and your input.
Chair, can I just ask, are we going straight to building standards?